Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is DreamFiction and today we will be reading the story Issei, the True Dragon of the Apocalypse, translated into English by Jyanzein.
The lights in the gym came on, causing Issei to startle a little, while Kaneko seemed unsurprised. "Come out, Gremmaries. We know you're here." The command from the female voice made Issei and Kaneko come out from their hiding place, seeing how 4 girls were waiting for them. Issei just looked at them with some surprise, not knowing what exactly to say. 3 are pawns. The one in front is a rook. Kaneko's simple cold comment made Issei glare at her. Issei bumped her fists with a defiant smile on her face. "In that case, leave the rook to me and you take care of the pawns, Kaneko." Kaneko looked at him with an expression that said, "Are you an idiot?" causing Issei to look at her in confusion. "You don't have much combat experience, so I don't think you'll be able to withstand the blows well, and we're talking about a rook. Basically, your forte is stamina and/or physical strength." Issei blinked in confusion, not understanding why Kaneko didn't want him to fight her. "I already know that very well, that's exactly why I want to fight her." Kaneko continued to look at him like he was an idiot, making Issei start to get nervous. "How much longer do you intend to keep talking?" the woman in front asked, with a hint of irritation in her words. Issei and Kaneko looked at her with some surprise. "If you guys don't come to us," the woman gave them a slightly creepy smile. "Then we will come to you." The 4 women rushed towards the stage at top speed. Kaneko got into a defensive stance when she saw the 3 pawns rushing against her. "No," Kaneko thought, knowing that the rook's target was Issei. Issei gritted her teeth as the woman began to raise her staff to deliver a heavy blow. The chestnut prepared to defend himself. He prepared and braced himself. How slow, Issei thought with widened eyes as he activated the gauntlet to block and grab the staff with almost no difficulty, then lured her towards him and delivered a hard blow to her abdomen that separated her feet from the ground. The woman's eyes widened in surprise, spitting out a large amount of blood. Issei took a step back, surprised at himself as he watched the woman writhe on her knees in pain. Kaneko and the other 3 women looked on in shock. At what point did she acquire such strength and reflexes? Thought the Nekomata in genuine amazement. The woman looked at him with great pent-up rage as she struggled up from the ground with great difficulty. Tiamat was much faster and stronger, Issei thought as a small smile began to form on his face. "Boost!" The woman lashed out at Issei again with her staff, without paying attention to the speaking voice. With the newfound strength, Issei deflected the attack with all her might using the gauntlet, sending the woman's staff flying away, as it couldn't withstand such force exerted against it. It didn't take more than a second for her to be surprised by the fact that her weapon went flying, as Issei gave her a strong punch in the face that deformed her face a little, and then gave her a strong kick in the chest that sent her flying against the other side of the gymnasium. When she hit the wall, she kicked up some dust and spat spit, falling to the floor with a thud and falling completely unconscious. By now, the 3 razor pawns were staring at Issei with some terror, feeling a cold sweat break out all over their faces. Kaneko didn't waste the distraction and proceeded to deliver a heavy blow to the neck of one of the girls, which was heard as a loud pop. The 2 remaining women turned to look at Kaneko, gritting their teeth tightly. "Issei isn't the only one who hits hard," were Kaneko's simple words, giving the 2 girls an expressionless look. "Rook, Shui, pawn, Kira, of House Razor have been defeated." Issei watched with some surprise as the 2 downed girls disappeared from the gym via a green light. "Issei, go." Kaneko's simple words caused Issei to glare at her. "I'll take them both." He nodded without complaint, rushing out of the place, while multiple boosts could be heard, due to his emotions being somewhat run wild for obvious reasons. After Issei exited the building, he took a couple of steps until he saw a large light project over his head. Knowing that indicated trouble, the Brown quickly defended his head with the gauntlet, while another boost was heard in the process. The magical attack hit his gauntlet with great force, sinking his feet into the ground a little. Issei gritted his teeth in surprise when he saw that the fire attack was cracking his gauntlet. Finally, the attack stopped as the gauntlet shattered into 1,000 pieces, resetting Issei's hit count, causing him to fall to the ground from the sudden loss of strength. "Oh, you managed to withstand my attack? That's pretty incredible stuff for a low-class demon." The wavy purple-haired woman spoke, looking at Issei with a bit of surprise. The young man wasted no time and leapt to his feet, activating his gauntlet again. This time, the boost ran even faster than the previous time, due to the somewhat desperate feeling that emerged from him because of that woman. "She's not like the others." I'd better be very careful, or one of those attacks could really hurt me. He thought, gritting his teeth tightly as he reached his 10th boost with great speed. The woman hummed to herself. In that case, a considerably larger fireball appeared on her staff. I'll use a slightly stronger attack. The woman's eyes widened in a sinister manner, causing Issei to quickly get on guard. Not a good option to block it. Issei thought sharply, preparing to pounce when she launched the attack. Just as she pointed the staff in his direction, a large electric yellow magic circle appeared in the green sky, causing the woman to widen her eyes in shock and change the direction of the attack at the last second, sending it skyward. A huge bolt of lightning descended from the magic circle in the direction of the woman, which slammed hard into the large firebomb, causing both attacks to cancel each other out in a nice explosion. Phew phew phew. Issei recognized that voice instantly, causing a huge grin to break out on his face as a familiar figure appeared flying in front of him. Akeno. I think it's time for me to have some fun, commented the aforementioned, licking her finger in a sadistic and lewd manner. Issei, quickly go where Kiba is. Issei grabbed his ear at the sound of Ria's voice. He recently locked 3 razor pawns in the trap, but the circle of containment was too obvious. It's more than certain they'll head in his direction and break through the barrier, or wait for him outside for an ambush. Issei just nodded seriously and ran off towards Kiba's position, leaving Akeno and Kaneko alone. Line jump. 2 razor pawns have been eliminated. Issei looked up with some surprise. That means Kaneko made it. The chestnut thought with a smile. Those thoughts were interrupted when he bumped into someone. Oh, it's you? Issei declared with a grin when he saw that it was Kiba. Where are the enemies? His smile was replaced with seriousness after that question. Kiba pointed behind his back. I already took care of them. Issei looked behind him to see how 3 women were lying on the ground, disappearing in a flash after a second. That's impressive. Issei exclaimed with a smile, then looked at the tree seriously. But this isn't over yet. Get out of there, we already know you're here. After a few seconds, a large curtain of dust rose on the site, revealing a brown woman who had a pair of bandages in her hair. I am Razor's horse, and by my loyalty to him I swear I will crush you. Though her words were threatening, her innocent tone took away from her seriousness. Kiba took a couple of steps forward, pointing his sword at the woman. I'll take care of her, Issei. The aforementioned merely nodded. Issei stood behind Kiba, watching his movements. It's all different now, Issei thought, blinking in surprise. Before, Kiba's movement seemed pretty fast to me. He said to himself, watching the sparks fly every time Kiba clashed swords with his opponent. Now he's not slow, but not fast either. It's normal. Issei looked down at his gauntlet as he heard another surge. Maybe it's due to the augmentations in training? He wondered, surprised at himself. They're outnumbered. Issei watched as a woman smaller than him appeared, bearing a rather large resemblance to Razor. We'll crush you first, and then we'll take care of the night. Who are you? Issei pointed at her brazenly. My name is Ravel Phoenix. I am Razor's younger sister, and his bishop. The woman replied in a fine and proud manner, denoting her noble background. After Ravel introduced herself, Razor's remaining pieces surrounded him, causing Kiba to glance back with a frown. Issei, on the other hand, was thinking of other things. Wait a minute. Issei placed his hand on his chin as he thought carefully. All of Razor's pieces are women, so he must be some sort of harem king, and he has his younger sister among those women. Issei stood completely still, causing all the women to look at him strangely. Slowly, his face began to turn violet. Your brother Issei? Issei pointed indiscriminately at him, making Ravel blush to understand what he was referring to. We must maintain the purity of our species. Ravel shouted, making Issei look at her as if she were insane. Ravel quickly regained her composure. Whatever. A low-class demon should not and cannot meddle in matters that do not concern him. Especially, if he is a reincarnated demon who understands nothing about our kind. Finally, the chestnut decided to forget everything that had just happened, or else he would be distracted from the fight. Isabella, finish him off. The blonde ordered, causing a chestnut woman with half of her face covered by a metal mask to step forward. I am Lord Razor's rook. By my loyalty to him, I swear that. Yes, yes, yes. Issei waved his hand in boredom, making the women a little angry. I'm getting tired of your ridiculous presentations. Issei's eyes would flash, raising his gauntlet against the woman as he pointed at her. Let us begin at once. The woman gritted her teeth. You will pay for your insolence. She lunged at Issei. The protagonist waited for her until the last second, feeling he had all the time in the world to dodge her. But it was not in his plans to do so. The woman tried to punch Issei in the face, but Issei stopped her in her tracks in one swift movement, using his left hand. That is, the one without the gauntlet. With his bare hand? Shouted Ravel with great surprise. I don't keep track of how many augmentations I go. But it must be more than 20. So my strength, stamina and speed must be more than double when the first battle began. Issei clenched his gauntlet tightly, making a menacing metallic noise. The chestnut watched this in terror and tried to quickly wriggle out of his grip to no avail, as Issei had a pretty good hold on her. She's a bit stronger than the last one, so 2 hits should do it. Issei punched her hard in the abdomen, causing the woman's eyes to widen as wide as they could go. Issei's entire fist sank into her stomach, forcing her to vomit up a large amount of blood, staining Issei's face a bit in the process. The heavy blow generated a small blizzard around her, causing everyone, even Kiba, to look on in shock. Just as Issei prepared to strike the second blow, the woman collapsed in her grip, causing the brown-haired man to look at her in disbelief. A second later, the woman disappeared in a flash of green. Issei looked down at his gauntlet in shock. Silence had been palpable on the Phoenix side. In one fell swoop, Ravel thought rather alarmed. There is no other choice. The blonde shouted, causing them all to glare at her. Let's all attack together. The women quickly nodded and rushed at Issei, while Ravel and the other bishop hung back, preparing magical attacks. Issei watched as the women quickly ran towards him, with absolute coordination. Even so, they were still slow. Issei ducked his head to dodge a blow, then swung his body to the side to dodge another one that went for his chest, then leaned to the other side to dodge another blow that went in the opposite direction, and finally finished with a great leap, dodging all the women and causing them to slam into each other. Issei spread his wings so that he could fly, watching from above with some grace. Your coordination is really good. But it's no use if your opponent is much stronger than you. That's what Tiamat explained to me, and I see she was quite right. 2 considerably large magical attacks impacted against Issei's back without him being able to defend himself. We got him. Ravel exclaimed with a huge grin on her face as she watched the dust cloud begin to dissipate. Both women widened their eyes in shock when they saw that Issei's shirt was torn, but he only had small scratches all along his back. Damn, I let my guard down, thought the young man with a frown as he felt pinpricks along the entire length of his back. Her face slowly turned purple. If Tiamat had seen this, she would have surely increased my training hours even more. Issei tried to look at his back, seeing that it was no big deal. Good thing the power-ups are already taking effect, or else that attack would have been devastating. He thought seriously. The tower and the queen of the House of Rias have been eliminated. Both Kiba and Issei widened their eyes in shock at what they heard. Issei clenched his fists tightly as he watched as all the gathered women were studying him warily with their eyes. The protagonist gave Kiba a quick glance, causing him to nod as he continued his fight, though the other woman was already visibly exhausted. Issei tilted his gauntlet towards them, causing them all to visibly twitch. A small red orb generated at the tip of his gauntlet, causing the women to look at each other in confusion. Dragon shot. The small orb transformed into a large red bolt of lightning that shot out at the women, causing their eyes to widen in palpable disbelief. Still, Issei was a bit far away, so it gave them enough time to dodge it. Kiba saw this and quickly separated his opponent from him with a loud clash of swords that sent her flying, then created another sword and thrust it into her stomach with one throw. The blonde wasted no time and buried his sword in the ground, causing a large number of blades to start flying out of the ground at a considerable height. The women turned to escape, but they were all caught and cut by the swords that came out of nowhere, falling to the ground. They all opened their eyes in horror, as the sonic attack was already inches away from their faces. A huge explosion echoed through the scene, causing everyone to take cover from the massive amount of debris the attack produced. A complete curtain covered the battlefield, making it impossible to see where the attacks were coming from. The 2 bishops stood together back to back, waiting for an attack. A quick flash crossed in front of one of the bishops, widening her eyes in surprise, only to have a large stream of blood spurt out all over her torso, courtesy of Kiba. The dust began to dissipate, making Ravel able to see Kiba. Now, who's outnumbered? Kiba asked with a condescending smirk, making the blonde even angrier. Issei clenched his right fist with a big victorious smile on his face. Issei's eyes flickered in shock as he could see a huge fireball instantly impact Kiba, causing a huge scream to be heard along with the huge explosion. Kiba was thrown out of the dust by the sheer magnitude of the explosion, having bruises and burns all over his body, plus his shirt and half of his trousers had been completely destroyed. Kiba rolled a couple of meters on the ground until he finally fell completely unconscious, causing a green glow to cover him and disappear from the scene. Ravel, go with Razor. He's taking on the Gremory brat. Issei raised his gaze, gritting his teeth tightly at the sight of Razor's queen. I'll take care of this kid. Ravel nodded. Thank you, Yubaluna. She took off running towards the direction of the rooftops. Wait! Issei would yell, starting to fly in his direction. He slammed on the brakes as another, smaller fireball passed within an inch of his face. I am your rival, boy. Yubaluna declared with a mischievous grin on her face. Issei took some distance, gritting his teeth tightly. I must end this quickly. Issei tilted his gauntlet towards Yubaluna. With a normal one I won't make it through their attack. You must be careful with the amount of magic power you use. If you use a large amount of magic reserves all at once, you will cause your mind to overload. As if you go into an uncontrollable dizzy spell, and you might even faint, like what happened to you just now. Issei recalled Tiamat's words, causing a small smile to appear on his face. In that case, Issei gave a large sigh as the small orb grew twice as large. It'll be 20%. Yubaluna just watched the attack with a small smug smile on her face. Really, you think that'll rival my firebomb? The queen pointed her staff at him, creating a huge fireball. You've got to be kidding me. The woman threw the attack, with the idea of completely crushing Issei. Dragon shot. Her eyes widened in shock as the small orb transformed into a large attack. Both magical powers collided in the middle, fighting for power for a short second, as the dragon shot overtook it with great ease. When Yubaluna thought to dodge the attack, it was already in front of her. Arg! A great scream was heard at the same time as the explosion hit, causing Issei to cover his eyes a bit from the huge blizzard that the attack raised. Yubaluna stepped out of the curtain of dust, plummeting down with her clothes almost completely shredded. A small blush shot across Issei's face at the sight of her breasts, but she quickly regained her composure as she knew why she was here. Issei slapped his cheeks hard. This is not the time to be thinking about breasts. He took off in the direction of the school's rooftop, seeing some explosions could be seen from the distance. Line jump. It's a shame it must end this way, Riaz, my love. Razor commented, preparing a massive fire attack that looked like a tiny sun for its size. Riaz had her clothes somewhat shredded, causing one of her breasts to be exposed, showing that they had been fighting for a while now. Damn, what can we do against his regeneration? Riaz thought in despair, gritting his teeth tightly. He didn't have much time to think of an idea, as the large fireball headed in his direction. Although the attack was really big, its speed was completely abnormal, so it was already only a meter away from the two women. Issei stepped right in the middle of the attack, stopping the huge fireball in its tracks with his gauntlet. The chestnut clenched his teeth tightly as he felt the heat and force of the attack, pushing him to his limit very quickly. The attack began to drag him down, causing him to widen his eyes beyond belief. Boost! 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 Bistuo! That last surge indicated that he had reached his limit. Although he had managed to stop the attack's advance, his gauntlet was beginning to crack, causing him to become visibly worried. Promise to tower. He shouted with elation, causing the tower symbol to appear on his body in a red magic circle. The gauntlet instantly stopped cracking. But even so, it still wasn't enough. Issei clenched his teeth tightly in great pain as he rested his bare hand on the attack. He took a step forward, causing the massive fireball to begin to recoil. Oh, Razor said to himself, quite impressed by what he was seeing. A great glint flashed across Issei's eyes as he raised his gaze. The large fireball shot up into the sky after Issei's shout, causing it to crash into the barrier and generate a huge explosion. Issei fell to his knees, breathing heavily as he grabbed his burned arm in considerable pain. They easily became second-degree burns. Asia quickly rushed to his aid, beginning to heal him. Good job. The nun commented, causing Issei to give her a pained smile. Issei, are you alright? She asked Riaz, approaching him. Issei was unable to answer, as Razor's leisurely clapping drew everyone's attention. Impressive, I would never have thought a low-class reincarnated demon could stop my best attack. Razor exclaimed, a cocky grin on his face. You've got some pretty interesting pieces, Riaz. Razor narrowed his eyes with a dangerous glint in them. Don't you think it would be really bad if something happened to them? Riaz just glared at him with great hatred, causing Razor to shake his head in disappointment. First, you dare to interfere in the most important matters of maintaining purity in the demons, adding the factor of wanting to damage a great pact between two families belonging to the 72 pillars for your own well-being. And now, you are willing to throw away such valuable pieces for reproach, knowing that your defeat is imminent. Razor bowed his shoulders, a smile on his face. You are a hopelessly spoiled brat. Razor gave him a lustful look, making Riaz feel disgusted. But I'll take care of controlling you when you're my wife. How can you say that, you fucker? Issei shouted, rising from the spot, now fully healed. The president should be able to marry whoever she wants, and for that very reason she acts that way. Razor gave him a somewhat surprised look until he finally burst out laughing. It doesn't matter what that girl wants or doesn't want. Razor's face instantly grew serene. The demons are going through very hard times since the last war. There are very few pure demons left, and we need to increase that number so that our species doesn't end up disappearing. She is not the only one who will have to submit to arranged marriages, so will her younger brother and many other pure demons, regardless of their social class. Razor raised both his hands to emphasize his words as a smile appeared on his face. It is for survival. Therefore, it is inconceivable that this brat would behave this way. Issei lowered his gaze, taking in everything he had heard. He stayed like that for a couple of seconds, until… What does it matter to me? Razor looked at him in astonishment. She's the one who gave me a second chance, so it doesn't matter what you say. I don't care if the demons will be extinct in a day or hundreds of years. If she's happy, it means I'll have accomplished my job as a servant. Issei waved his hand disapprovingly, clenching it tightly at the end. Razor looked at him seriously for several seconds, without saying a word. Brat, you're just as much of an idiot as she is. Razor replied, folding his arms as he looked at him with a big smug grin on his face. First, for thinking that the extinction of his species is worth the happiness of your mistress. And second, for thinking you can defeat me. Razor spread his arms wide, being a target everywhere. Go ahead, try any attack to make you realize the difference between us. Razor gave a quick glance behind his back, signaling Rabble to get the hell out of the place if he didn't want to come to any harm. Issei looked at him with great seriousness for a few seconds. Aren't you going to dodge it? Of course not, I won't need to lift a finger. Razor exclaimed, mocking him. A small smile appeared on Issei's face upon hearing his response. Then the chestnut bowed his gauntlet towards Razor, causing an orb considerably larger than the previous one to appear in his palm. I'll take your word for it. Razor merely nodded, his smug grin widening even further as he saw the small magical attack he was about to launch. You've got to be kidding me, I'm sure his physical condition is his real strength. Otherwise, I can't understand how she manages to defeat my queen. Issei gave a big sigh, feeling like a dizziness was starting to bother his entire body. I've already used 30% the best thing, I'll use 60% in case things don't go as planned. Are you sure about this, partner? Drake questioned with clear concern in his words. Issei smiled at his friend's concern. Don't worry, he said he wouldn't move. And if he tries to, this attack is much bigger than the previous ones. He won't have any escape. Issei gave a small sigh, then widened his eyes to the max. Dragon shot. A great sonic wave burst from the gauntlet, completely obliterating everything in its path. It's dangerous. Razor widened his eyes slightly as he saw the attack, creating a magical orange circle that acted as a barrier. The attack hit the barrier hard, causing Razor to grit his teeth as he used all his strength to maintain the magic circle. After a few seconds, a small crack appeared in the barrier. What? Shouted Razor in great surprise as the entire barrier began to crack until it finally shattered into 1,000 pieces. Razor screamed with great force as he was engulfed by the dragon shot, causing only his vigor to begin to release a large amount of blood. After that, Issei threw Riaz and Asia to the ground along with him. A second later, a huge explosion rose up all over the place, causing the roof of the school to be completely destroyed. President, Asia! Shouted Issei with great concern, not seeing how they were doing due to the huge curtain of dust. We're fine, Issei. Riaz would reply, struggling to his feet as he rubbed his butt in pain from the fall. You blew up half of Kuo Academy with just one attack. You're awesome. Asia would add, getting up from the ground in the same pain as Riaz. When the dust finally began to dissipate, they could see that they were at the entrance of the academy, though the first floor and the others were already history. Fuck. The three widened their eyes in shock at the sound of the voice, slowly beginning to turn around. That hurt like hell. Now I can see how you defeated Ubeluna. Issei quickly stepped in front of the two as he saw that Razor was lying on the ground a few feet away. His entire body was surrounded by flames, with the exception of his face. On it, you could see that he was holding a huge fake smile, while a large amount of cold sweat was running down his face. I'll never trust myself that much again, damn it. That really hurt. Razor would think rather upset, looking at Issei with great attention. How does a low-class scum have so much power? Razor would get up from the ground with great caution, something very rare for him. Issei felt his vision go a little blurry, adding to the fact that everything was moving in a strange way. Razor raised an eyebrow as Issei staggered to the side. A sinister smile appeared on his face after processing what he had seen. Of course. A low-class reincarnated devil wouldn't be able to stand up after making such a powerful attack. Razor straightened his gaze instantly, making everyone tense up more than they already were. I won't trust myself. I'll finish you off before I regret not doing it. Razor spread wings of fire on his back similar to those of the phoenix, flying at a great speed towards where Issei was. The protagonist observed with great patience how the fist covered in fire slowly approached his face, dodging it by the hair and receiving a small burn on his cheek. A small rumble was heard in the place, added to a huge blizzard. After a second, Razor spat out a large amount of blood due to Issei landing a strong blow to his abdomen. Razor's eyes widened in rage and he wasted no time, kneeing him hard in the stomach that completely unbalanced Issei. Issei took a couple of steps back as his eyes trembled in pain. Razor wiped the blood from her mouth as she slowly approached him with a seriousness palpable on her face. Issei landed a strong blow to Razor's face, causing him to expel a large amount of blood. Even so, the pure demon was unfazed by the pain and struck him hard in the face, followed by another and another. Having taken a complete beating, Issei finally fell to the ground, half conscious. Razor took a few steps towards him while looking at him seriously. He stood in front of Issei, looking down at him with great superiority. Issei, get up and use another dragon shot. Ria's scream made Razor look down at her. This boy can't even move anymore, he thought the blonde while he looked at him in disgust. Even so, he gave his all to defend his master from him. From what I understand, he was only reincarnated a month and a half ago, Razor recalled the great magic attack. And he can already do attacks like that. A small mysterious gleam graced his eyes. I don't like to admit it, but his power and high fidelity will come in handy when the time is right. Besides, if I keep having fun with him until I kill him, I'd be in pretty big trouble with Zerziches, and that wouldn't do me any good. Razor slowly shifted his gaze from him to Ria's, making the woman jump from her murderous aura. If the Securite is on the side of the devils, why eliminate it? It doesn't make any sense. Razor raised his hand aiming to damage Ria's, starting to create a huge ball of fire. Then he better end his stupidity right now. A huge explosion would shake the screen, leaving everything covered in dust. Zerziches, that he was watching the combat, he would smile with a mysterious aura around him. That's right, Razor. If we manage to get the Securite under our control, all the plans we have in the future will come to fruition. Zerziches rested his hand on his chin, making his mysterious smile grow even more. If everything goes according to plan, I'll have to let the fallen angels know after the wedding, which unfortunately won't work out for you, Razor. I'm sorry for you, but if I can make Issei fall in love with my sister, everything will be entirely on my hands. Reigns. I will only need a small collaboration of my dear sister, who will surely agree to it. Rating Game Finale. Winner. House Phoenix. Even being semi-conscious, Issei could hear the voice that announced the end of the fight. He could only think of one thing before passing out. For some strange reason, he thought of her first, since Ria's was in a much more compromising position. He didn't know why, but in that single, small moment he had only been able to think of her. In her hair. In her smile. In her eyes. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Tiamat. No. Issei shouted at the top of his lungs, sitting up in bed in an instant as a cold sweat broke out all over his face. The protagonist looked around in utter shock. My room? He asked himself, beginning to take in all that had happened. I see I lost. He commented, lowering his head in disappointment. Before he could think of anything else, he felt arms wrap around him over his shoulders. Issei, you're finally awake! Exclaimed a sweet familiar voice with great joy, sinking his face into the chestnut's neck. Tiamat? Issei asked, not reciprocating the embrace out of the shock of the moment. Just a moment. He added with great seriousness. For how many days have I been unconscious? Tiamat pulled away from him and looked at him with great concern. You were unconscious for 3 days. Since you did not visit me after the day of the battle and I did not feel any emotions through our union, I became concerned and decided to come to see how you were doing. I have been taking care of you these days, but unfortunately my healing is not able to heal internal wounds. My parents didn't say anything about your presence? Issei asked, with great impression. Tiamat quickly denied. No. When I arrived, you were alone in the house. At that moment, the realization hit Issei's head. Right, they were going on a month-long trip. Issei looked towards the closed window with great melancholy and sorrow, causing Tiamat to look at him with even more concern. I was afraid this might happen. I only hope I can find a way to remedy it. Chapter 10. A New Power. Issei watched silently as Tiamat got out of bed and went to open the window. Although her body and soul were there, her mind was elsewhere. I let her down. I couldn't return the president's favor. Issei thought, clenching his fists tightly. How will she be right now? Comrade Drake interrupted his thoughts, bringing Issei's attention to him. I understand that you're worried about her. But keep in mind that no one came to check on you, not for a single day, not for a single second. You were simply left here to heal on your own. On the other hand, Tiamat was with you from day one, and she was the only one who took care of you and worried about you. Even if me and that crazy dragoness don't get along, I have to say that Riaz doesn't deserve a bit of your attention right now. The one who really deserves your consideration is the woman in front of you, opening that window. You'll have time to think about your mistress's situation later, so make sure Tiamat gets the attention she deserves. Drake's words made Issei's eyes widen as he watched Tiamat finally open the window, causing a blinding light to illuminate her beautiful figure, while a blizzard shook her hair in a mesmerizing way. It would have been quite splendid if the woman didn't have such a worried look on her face. You're right. Drake, I don't want to worry her any more than she already is with my negative thoughts. Issei thought seriously. When Tiamat turned her gaze back to him, she looked a little surprised when he was giving her a big friendly smile. Thank you so much for taking care of me, Tiamat. You even came to the human world to treat me. I don't know how to thank you. Issei looked in another direction with an embarrassed expression on his face. You just have to keep your promise. Issei looked at her with great surprise as he felt her sit down next to him. She was giving him a sympathetic smile. I hope you'll take me out to eat in this small town soon. That clarification made Issei chuckle, while Tiamat was visibly relieved to see that the situation wasn't as dire as it seemed, as he was still just as sweet to her. Still, that friendly, comfortable moment was completely shattered when Issei's stomach rumbled loudly. A flush of embarrassment erupted on Issei's face, causing Tiamat to turn a smirk on him. Is anyone hungry after not eating for 3 days? The dragoness asked with an amused tone in her words. Damn, I'm just now realizing that. Issei replied, clutching her stomach with a slight grimace due to the great aching emptiness she felt in her abdomen. Don't worry. I'll go get some fruits to eat right now. Tiamat commented, giving him one last hug more, which this time Issei was able to reciprocate. Really, I'm so glad you're awake now. The hug continued for longer than they both thought it would, until finally Tiamat broke away. I'll be back as soon as I can. Line jump. A few minutes passed, during which Issei did not move from the spot at any time. An expressionless look decorated his face, making it impossible to tell whether he was well or ill. No one could guess, except for his friend inside his head. Are you still thinking about that? Drake questioned with a disapproving tone, not understanding why he still cared after what he told him. I'd just like to know how they're doing. If they didn't come to visit me, it means they're mad at me. Issei commented, raising his gaze. I don't think I'll be able to see their faces again, especially the president. Do you think they lost because of you? No shit, they barely got to collaborate in the battle. You did most of the work. But I didn't finish it. Issei shouted, angry at himself. I'm supposed to be the Sekuyuite, someone capable of defeating the gods themselves, but I couldn't even defeat a high-class demon. He added in great frustration, making Drake unable to comment on the matter. You don't need to hide it from me, I know I'm the weakest of all your bearers. Issei finished shouting, on the verge of tears from the great frustration built up. An awkward silence fell in the room for several seconds until finally Drake decided to answer her. It's true, you are the weakest bearer of all. Issei clenched his fists and teeth tightly at Drake's words. But you are also the bearer with the biggest heart of all. The dragon's words surprised the protagonist. You're the only bearer I've had so far who only wants more power to protect their loved ones. All the others only wanted power to dominate, allowing themselves to be totally corrupted by my power and turning me into a mere tool of their own. But you proved to me that you were different from the very first days. You proved to me that you really are my partner. For that very reason, I know that you will not end up consumed with power and reach levels that are even unimaginable to me. Drake was surprised when Issei began to laugh at his words. Don't you think you're being a little over the top? You're one of the 2 heavenly dragons. It's impossible for me to reach a level that even you don't know about. The dragon chuckled, agreeing with his bearer and causing the mood to twist to a much more cheerful one, abandoning the depressing vibe. Yeah, you're right. I just got a little carried away for the moment. Before Issei could thank him for easing his frustration, a magic circle he didn't identify appeared in the room, activating his gauntlet instantly in defense. Sorry for the inconvenience, Securite. I come to bring a message from Surzage's Lucifer, elder brother of Ria's Gremory. The albino woman, who appeared to be a servant, bowed her head in respect. Issei dematerialized his gauntlet and watched her with wide eyes. My president's brother? The albino nodded. That's right. The woman withdrew a small piece of paper from her hand that had a strange seal in the center. The wedding will be in a month, and you are invited. Issei took the paper and looked at it with great surprise. But Mr. Surzages didn't ask me to talk to you just to give you the invitation. He intends for you to be the one to crash the wedding. Barge in. Issei widened his eyes in complete surprise. Right. Apparently, you don't know that the second condition for hastening the marriage date had been that anyone who wished to break into the wedding and take Ria's hand through a confrontation against Razor is allowed. Is it allowed? Issei commented, questioned in complete astonishment, until he finally turned his attention to one particular part. Wait a minute, if I save the president, will I be engaged to her? Issei thought, reluctant to marry her. When the wedding is underway, I'll come looking for you to break into it. Issei cleared his thoughts and looked at her, nodding quickly. I'll think about that later. Now I just need to concentrate on saving her. He thought with great seriousness. The woman disappeared in a magical circle, leaving Issei alone again in the room. He rose from the bed slowly with an expressionless look on his face. Finally, Tiamat appeared on the scene and looked at him with a raised eyebrow as she saw that he was up. Did something happen, Issei? Issei's expressionless gaze slowly transformed into a large smile that promised to restore his pride at all costs, causing Tiamat to be visibly surprised. I have a second chance. Say, how about training me for another month? Tiamat's surprised look quickly changed to a sharp, pleased smile. If anyone not involved in the conversation had seen her, it would have given her a bit of a scare. Will you stand to go a full month without returning to the human world? I wasn't planning on showing my face until it's all sorted out anyway, and being there makes that job a lot easier. Pack your bags. Time skip. 6 days. The silence in the Hayadu residence was palpable. Not a sound had been heard for the past 6 days. Mitsuda and Motohama went to visit their friend out of concern, but found that there was no one in the place, so they thought that their friend had accompanied his parents on the work trip, and that his mobile phone had broken in America, or something like that. After Mitsuda and Motohama left the place, 2 more people appeared in front of the Hayadu house. I can't believe my brother is forcing me into this. Riaz commented in disgust, looking at the small house. His orders were clear. Asia stated earnestly. You have to be as close to him as possible and pretend you didn't care about the outcome of the rating game. Spend the next few days together with Issei at his house so that he starts to feel loving affection for you. Asia bowed her shoulders with a small smile. Knowing what Issei went through, it will be difficult to get him to open up to you, even if he is in love. A dangerous glint crossed Asia's eyes. You only have to kiss him non-stop when you're sure he's already in love with you. That way, we'll have him on our side forever. Riaz gave a big sigh and knocked on the door of the dorm. I know that. But it bothers me that I have to marry Issei. It's really repulsive just thinking about it. He whispered quietly, Asia being the only one who heard him. Don't worry about it. Remember, your brother mentioned that when you do your part, he'll help you cover up your relationship if you ever like someone. Asia whispered softly, causing a small smile to appear on Ria's face. You're right. What really bothers me is not being able to punish him, to make him feel the humiliation I felt when I lost in the rating game. It's the security, it's unbelievable that he can't handle a mere high-class demon like Razor. Ria spat with venom in his words. Asia just nodded in understanding of Ria's repressed actions, only to raise both eyebrows in confusion. Don't you think it's strange that he hasn't picked up yet? Ria's looked at Asia with the same expression. You're right, Grafia had said 6 days ago he was already conscious. Ria's put a hand to his chin. It's very strange, the Redeed concluded her thoughts, entering the house from the back. Line jump. Are you tired already? It's barely 11 o'clock at night. You could have held out for another hour yesterday, Tiamat declared, giving him numerous thrusts without even flinching, while Issei dodged or blocked them with his gauntlet with difficulty. He had long since had his power-ups maxed out, but it was no use if he had already been training for over 15 hours without any rest, except for lunch and dinner. Finally, Tiamat's sword ended up shattering the gauntlet into 1,000 pieces, causing Issei to fall backwards in a thud. Tiamat sighed to herself, relaxing and dematerializing her eye sword. The dragoness watched as Issei's chest heaved down and up with great intensity, looking like she was about to be seized by a seizure. Let's stop for today. You can't continue to be like this, it would be counterproductive. Tiamat declared an end to the training, kneeling in front of Issei's face earnestly, then giving him a tiny smile. Issei returned it, then gazed into her beautiful sea blue eyes with rapt attention. It's been 6 days since this started. I never thought training could become a real hell. Issei thought, having a small flashback of how it all started. Immortality, Tiamat thought aloud, rubbing her chin. Actually, it's not that far-fetched, as some demons are born with certain powers due to their lineage. From what you told me, their strengths were fairly balanced, with the exception of their magical reserves, which is really strange. Tiamat looked at Issei intently, giving him a deductive look. No demon would manage to hold on to the high class for long if you're no big deal. And apparently, immortality is what makes you the big deal. Tiamat removed her hand from her chin and snapped her fingers. All you need to do to win is defeat his immortality. You make it sound so easy, Issei replied with a roll of his eyes. Of course it's easy. Tiamat commented seriously. All you have to do is reach beyond. Break your limits. Break my limits? Issei asked, somewhat alarmed. That definitely didn't sound like an easy thing to do. Tiamat nodded. That's right. To do that, you need to take your boosted gear to the next level. Balance breaker, Drake stated, joining the conversation. Issei raised his hand as he watched the gauntlet materialize. If you don't mind, I'd like to explain this to the boy, since you only know about it from our confrontations. Tiamat just nodded, letting Drake continue. The balance breaker is not something that allows you to break your limits, it is actually an evolution of the boosted gear, Drake explained, clearing his throat. That evolution will allow you to manifest a great deal of my power, causing all of your qualities to be greatly enhanced. The problem is, it's immensely difficult to release it the first time. You need to reach a certain amount of power, which, to be honest, you still have a long way to go. Issei lowered his head, somewhat dejected by the last part. But that's not the only condition. You must also have a great trigger of negative emotions, along with a small compatibility with my soul. That is, a small compatibility with dragons. Issei and Tiamat looked at the gauntlet in amazement. Dragon compatibility? Drake began to laugh loudly at Issei's concern, causing Issei to look at him like he was an idiot. The last point you've had since birth, thanks to my soul residing within yours. Then that shouldn't be a condition in the first place. Issei shouted at Drake's tasteless joke. Inside Issei, Drake's amused expression changed to a serious one when he heard his words. That's right. That's not a condition, since humans have no compatibility with dragons in the first place, thought the dragon to himself, turning around to look at his soul. His body used to be human, no doubt about it. Drake narrowed his eyes with great seriousness. But his soul. Drake remembered the purple flash in the battle against Raynor, and how quickly his boosted gear evolved, even though the power required was still below average. His soul is very strange. It's as if he has a strange connection to our species. Drake finally bowed his shoulders with a smile. It would be impossible for him to achieve balance breaker in just a month of training. But his strange compatibility makes me think he might. That is why I can consider compatibility a condition on this occasion. The dragon concluded his thoughts, waiting with great anxiety to see how events would unfold. In short, Tiamat's words made Issei pay attention to her. To break your limits you need to train, 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 and train. Since you will be staying here this time, I will make sure the training is much more rigorous than the last." Those words caused the chestnut to become instantly serious as a cold sweat ran down his face, swallowing hard. If the previous training had been too hard, he didn't even want to imagine what this one would be like. And in the end, it turned out to be a living nightmare. "Are you alright?" Tiamat's question brought Issei back to the present again. "You've been staring into my eyes for several minutes." Issei instantly realized that Tiamat's face was closer to his than he remembered, adding the fact that she had also been looking him in the eyes for all that time, without saying a word. "Yeah, it's just I was thinking about how it all started," Issei replied, getting up with great difficulty, being supported by Tiamat. "Is something bothering you?" The dragoness consulted, resting Issei's full weight on her shoulder affectionately. The protagonist lowered his gaze instantly, indicating that Tiamat had hit the mark. "You know, I've been thinking that I might not be able to beat her." As I surmised, the defeat dealt him more trauma than failing his mistress. Tiamat thought perceptively. "What makes you think that?" "He is a high-class demon who is blessed by fate with his immortality. And I'm the weakest Sekuyuite who ever lived." "Are you telling me that you weren't blessed by fate?" Issei lowered his head even further at Tiamat's question. "You consider that you weren't blessed by fate, being that the underdeveloped lizard ended up in your body, having millions and millions of choices?" The chestnut raised his gaze slightly, widening his eyes slightly. "There is only one other person like you in this vast world, and you would say that fate has no great things in store for you? No matter how weak you are, if you are the Sekuyuite, sooner or later you will become a world power. And that can only be achieved thanks to your destiny." Issei looked up with great surprise, seeing Tiamat's serious face curve into a genuine smile. "All you need to get there is a little spirit." Tiamat pressed her cheek against his in a very affectionate act, causing a small blush to shoot across Issei's face. "And I know very well that you have that spirit." So Tiamat rested her free hand on Issei's hair and ruffled it affectionately. "Don't waste it." Issei gave a big sigh, then gave her a tired smile. "You're right. I just got a little carried away in defeat. Life is not a utopia." Tiamat replied quickly, looking at him piercingly. "No matter who you are or how strong you are, there will always be a time in your life when you will suffer, because life is not perfect. And what's really important is not how good most of your life was, but the times when it was a nightmare, and you still managed to move on." Tiamat's piercing gaze changed to a big smile that was dedicated solely to Issei, causing a pleasant little shiver to adorn the chestnut's entire body. "If you ever hit rock bottom, I'll be sure to be there for you. Just like you helped me when I was at my worst, I swear." Issei could only watch her with a small blush from all the intense emotions the dragoness gave off, and they permeated the bottom of his heart. After a few seconds, she gave him a big smile and broke away from his grip, feeling her strength had mysteriously returned. "In that case, I swear too." The chestnut held out his mannequin, causing Tiamat to look at him with some confusion and surprise. Seeing that her now best friend didn't understand the interaction, Issei took her arm gently and slowly pulled it up. "If you ever find yourself in a delicate situation, I promise to help you again, and as often as you need it." Issei linked her little finger with Tiamat, causing the dragoness to watch the interaction with confusion, until finally she smiled and tightened a little squeeze even further. Tiamat lowered her gaze with an imperceptible blush as she saw Issei staring at her, with that incredible smile on his face that made her body shake with multiple emotions and incredible feelings. "Thank you for making me feel so great." Tiamat transformed this small grip into a much firmer one as she gently took his hand. Issei was visibly surprised by her act, but didn't have time to say or do anything. "Are we going to take a bath?" Issei blinked twice, then sniffed his armpit and shivered slightly at the smell. "Hell yeah, I stink." The young man looked at her with great surprise and suspicion as he saw that Tiamat appeared to be untouched. "Hey, why don't you ever end up tired or sweaty?" A somewhat mocking smile appeared on Tiamat's face. She started walking, leaving a couple of steps behind Issei. "Because you don't make me do it," she replied, with an amused and mocking tone in her words. "Hey." A throbbing vein appeared on Issei's forehead, quickly running towards Tiamat, falling over in the process due to all the fatigue returning to his body. Line jump. "What do you mean he wasn't at home?" Serzich's ever-calm face could not hide the quiver of his eyebrows, indicating his anger. "We searched for him all over the city, and no one knows anything about him," Riaz replied, lowering his head in submission. Serziches leaned back in his seat, thinking carefully about what to do. They have to find him. If we don't, our plans may not work. The Demon King stated, thinking carefully. If we don't find him, we can still resort to Plan B. Plan B? Riaz would ask with a raised eyebrow. Plan B is to not mention anything to the Securite about the engagement, indicating that we're not looking for that. We'll keep it a secret until you get his full attention. And if he asks to cancel the engagement, it would be best to tell him that he can do so after a couple of months. In those months, you'll get close enough to him that he'll start to see marriage as a good idea, Serziches stated with great calm in his words. The Supreme Demon took on a sinister gleam in his eyes all of a sudden, causing Riaz to glare at him. If all else fails, we will have no choice but to resort to Plan C. Which would be a shame. Line jump. Tiamat watched in genuine surprise to see Issei standing behind her. Do you plan to bathe near me? Asked the dragoness, who was already naked in the lake, upon seeing that the protagonist was in the same place as her. I was thinking that if you don't mind my presence even a little bit, I think I should think the same. Issei replied somewhat nervously, beginning to take off her clothes. Are you over your embarrassment already after 6 days? Tiamat would ask with a small amused tone in her words, then widen her eyes slightly in shock. His torso, thought the dragoness, seeing that the exercises had begun to show in a big way, and her marked chest and the 4 squares protruding from her abdomen were the proof. Issei continued to take off his clothes, leaving only his boxers. Unbeknownst to him due to the embarrassing situation, Tiamat wandered all over his body with her eyes wide open. I've seen men's bodies before that were much more worked out, but for some reason, Issei's body makes me feel strange. Tiamat averted her gaze with a small blush as she realized she had been looking at him for a long time. Why couldn't I stop looking at him? The dragoness wondered, dipping half of her face into the natural hot springs to hide her blush. Somehow, this very normal situation for her wasn't exactly normal anymore. She was sure it was something she hadn't felt in over 2,000 years, but she didn't know what it was precisely. She only knew that it felt good. Tiamat woke up from her thoughts when Issei stepped into the water, seeing that his face was much less nervous than the first time. It probably wouldn't take him long to get used to bathing next to her, as long as that dense mist still covered most of her body, of course. Transition. 18 days. The transition indicates various events in the days covered, as opposed to the time skip. Come on, keep running. Tiamat commanded, as she watched Issei chase after the dragon dad with the intention of catching him. This had become routine training, as they always received his visits in the morning. Issei finally fell to the ground after running for more than 3 hours. He was not using any power-ups on Tiamat's orders, and for that very reason it looked like he would never be able to catch him. Tiamat slowly approached Issei, watching him seriously. The protagonist rolled onto his back while breathing completely agitated. Let's move on to the next one. Were Tiamat's simple words, causing Issei to turn serious and jump to his feet. 800. Issei would be doing some sit-ups, the last exercise before having a little friendly battle with Tiamat. The dragoness watched carefully as Issei's whole body was shaking, but even so her expression didn't seem to waver one bit. Come on, you're only halfway through. Exclaimed Tiamat, then gave her a small smile. Since the day we talked about his defeat, his mentality has strengthened drastically. Now, he not only has in mind to return the favor to his mistress, but he also wants to take the victory against that man at all costs. His smile increased even more as he saw Issei's completely sympathetic expression. We already have another thing in common, we both love fighting. Though you don't know it yet. 1745. Issei exclaimed, standing on his head, doing completely insane push-ups while maintaining his balance with perfection. Sweat ran down the entire length of his face, while his body trembled from each lowering and raising. Still, he seemed to have no intention of stopping. Remember, it's 2000 now. Tiamat declared, watching him with great attention, being joined by her 3 neighboring dragons. Issei would be watching with great seriousness as the 3 dragons had surrounded him. His body was visibly trembling, and the large amount of sweat running down his entire body indicated that he was completely exhausted, having just recently finished his daily exercises. Tiamat would be watching him, leaning against the cave entrance with her arms crossed. The male dragon opened his mouth, causing a small blue magic circle to appear in his mouth, followed by a bolt of lightning that shot in Issei's direction. The brown-haired man looked behind him and reacted quickly, moving his body to the side to dodge it. Even so, he had no respite as they all began to attack simultaneously. Issei would materialize his wings to be able to fly and dodge the 3 attacks with great difficulty due to fatigue. He couldn't think of a strategy as the consecutive attacks began to seek him out in the air, forcing him to dodge them all by the skin of his teeth. In fact, the last attack grazed his cheek, causing him to clench his teeth tightly, and he was knocked off balance by fatigue, falling to the ground with a thud. He quickly tried to get to his feet, but his limbs did not respond as he had hoped, causing all 3 attacks to hit him squarely. "That's enough," Tiamat would order, rushing over to Issei with some concern as she saw that he was nothing short of unconsciousness. "I know this is very hard, but I must make sure you take the victory this time," the dragoness would state softly as she stroked his cheek lovingly, beginning to heal him. The dragons looked at each other at the captivating interaction, but didn't comment as they were used to it. After all, they had been coming for more than 2 weeks in a row to visit them. A small smile would become visible on Tiamat's face as she watched Issei doing the one-handed push-ups, beginning to fully master the exercises. Even if the amount increases every day, she's getting less and less tired. This is getting very interesting, Tiamat would think, watching him with a smile. Issei would be doing his daily kicks and punches, but this time he was wearing a large block of ice covering his feet and hands. Movement was much more hampered, but he still managed to keep up with his exercises somewhat normally. Considering that it had only been almost 4 weeks, it was truly amazing. I wonder how fast and strong his punches and kicks will become in such a short time, Tiamat thought, watching him with a sideways grin as he ate a piece of fruit, denoting his beautiful fangs. Issei would be dodging all of the dragon's attacks in mid-air with considerable difficulty. They had been going at it for more than 15 minutes already, and it looked like it would soon be over by the completely exhausted expression on his face. The brown-haired man widened his eyes in horror when he saw how a bolt of lightning was inches away from his face, making it impossible to dodge. The impact was heard, only to be followed by Issei falling to the ground with a large wound on his right hand, indicating that he had reacted well enough to block it. Tiamat became alert at this and was about to stop the training, but was visibly surprised when Issei began to struggle up from the ground, while a large amount of blood stained the ground thanks to the deep cut on his hand. The dragons watched in complete surprise as Issei slowly rose to her feet, then stood in a defensive stance and looked at them with great seriousness. His piercing and reckless gaze does not match the great trembling of his whole body. Finally, Tiamat's surprise turned into a big proud smile as she saw that her future partner would not be taken down easily. Impressive. I can't think of another word to describe it. The male dragon looked completely shocked as Issei grabbed his head. Not only was he surprised, everyone was open-mouthed, even the chestnut himself. A cutting silence garnished the atmosphere. Until Issei raised his free fist and clenched it with great force. Ay. The chestnut's great shout made everyone excited to a great extent. Even Tiamat had a sparkle in her eyes that she had never had before. She felt great just watching him progress day after day. It felt great to have him by her side every day, watching him get closer and closer to reaching a new level. She was very proud of his progress and very happy with his company. I wish instead of a month, it had been a year, the dragoness thought, looking at him with much affection and longing. Line jump. Tiamat delivered a heavy blow to Issei's abdomen, forcing him to his knees, coughing in pain. I think it's time to finish. It's already past midnight, the dragoness thought, looking up at the sky. The 3 dragons were watching the friendly fight, nodding off from sleep. Only 3 days to go, Issei muttered under his breath, causing Tiamat to look at him, though she didn't hear what he said. I'll make sure I get there, he muttered again, coughing under his breath. His gaze was shadowed, so you couldn't see the myriad of emotions running through his eyes. She helped me for this whole month, relentlessly. She took care of me and let me sleep at her house for all these days. Issei felt like his entire stomach was churning from the myriad of emotions roaming through his body. Oddly enough, there weren't any negatives. That must be so, because he was thinking about Tiamat. He couldn't find any negative thoughts coming from her. I will make you proud. I will make you see that nothing was in vain. This last Tiamat did hear, watching Issei intently. Before Tiamat could tell him that nothing was in vain, that she enjoyed every day being around him, she heard something that completely confused her. Boost. Her power-ups hadn't reached their limit? The dragoness thought. Boost. This time, Tiamat's eyes widened in shock as she saw a red aura that gave off an immense amount of power completely surround Issei as he slowly raised his gaze. Drake smiled proudly inside Issei. Augmentations are not only based on the strength of the wearer, but also on their emotions. But this is the first time one of my bearers has managed to get more power-ups through positive emotions. The dragon thought, only to widen his eyes in shock as Issei's aura grew even larger and another boost was heard in the background. It's not? The dragon said to himself, completely anxious about what was happening. Finally, Issei raised his gaze fully, and the reddish energy burst even stronger again, creating a huge blizzard around him. Issei clenched his fists tightly, letting the positive emotions fill and dominate him completely. Boost. 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 At this point, the dragons are being covered by the huge blizzard, while Tiamat could only stare at it in great surprise and bewilderment. Bestuo. Just when everything seemed to be over, a small smile appeared on Issei's face. I wonder what smile he'll give me when he hears about my victory. The biggest smile that Tiamat ever gave him appeared in his mind. That smile had been the first of all the smiles she had given him. That beautiful smile, it came from the fact that he decided to stay with her so as not to leave her alone. That simple smile, that simple memory, was the trigger. Welsh dragon. Balance breaker. A strong reddish light surrounded Issei completely, making his figure impossible to make out. The dragons shielded their eyes from the blinding light, while Tiamat could only watch in complete stupefaction. When the light finally dissipated, the dragon's jaws dropped to the ground as they saw crimson armor covering him completely, along with green jewels on different parts of his armor. The power he radiated was so powerful and pure that a thin crimson aura surrounded him with great intensity. A small deafening sound could even be heard coming from it. Issei dematerialized his helmet, showing a completely serene and calm expression. In fact, Tiamat was looking at him with that same expression. They looked so professional, as they didn't even look surprised at what happened. But after a few seconds of staring at each other like that, they both started waving their hands around trying to gesture words, as if they were children entering a toy store for the first time. I can't believe it, they themselves are the most surprised, thought the male dragon with a smile as he watched the two's reaction, which looked like it would last for several more minutes. I never thought I could see Tiamat acting like that, the mother dragon declared, causing the other two to nod instantly. It's impressive to see how Issei has the power to make her so expressive. No one would believe that dragoness in front of us is the brooding, murderous dragon queen who prowled for millennia, added the male dragon, watching the interaction with an amused smile on his face. Good, Tiamat said to herself, studying the crimson armor closely. She fixed her gaze on Issei's eyes, causing the brown-haired man to glare at her. Let's have a little spar with this new power you've acquired, the dragoness commented, getting into a combat pose. I'll use exactly the same amount of power I've been using so far so you can see the difference. Issei merely nodded at her words, mimicking Tiamat's pose. Tiamat lunged at Issei without warning, causing the brown-haired man to grit his teeth slightly. Still, he was completely surprised when his teacher's movements were easily followed with his eyes. Consequently, Issei blocked the first punch in its tracks, causing a great blizzard to rise up around the place. The chestnut still had a surprised look on his face, while Tiamat gave him a bold little smile after what he witnessed. Tiamat jumped back a little and continued to throw various punches and kicks that Issei blocked or dodged without much difficulty. What is this? The movements that I could barely see before now seem normal to me, Issei thought with some surprise, as his eyes followed the attacks without any trouble, at the same time as his body responded with a great lightness, blocking and dodging them. It's not just that, thought the young man, catching a kick that went straight for his chest, causing the flurry of small blizzards caused by the speed to end with a bang. I can also parry punches without the slightest problem, being that they seemed almost unstoppable to me before. A somewhat macabre grin appeared on Issei's face, causing Tiamat to look at him quizzically. In that case, Issei further tightened his grip on Tiamat's foot, causing Tiamat's eyes to widen slightly. Following that, Issei attempted to kick her, but the dragon defended her face with her forearm, blocking the attack without any trouble. After that collision, Issei reacted quickly and tried to punch her in the face. Seeing this, a small smirk shot across Tiamat's face. Does he really think he can reach me? He thought, breaking Issei's grip with great ease, using Issei's hand as momentum, somersaulting high into the air, and landing with his back to him, causing his opponent to blink in surprise. Even so, he could not control the sheer amount of force he used in the blow, so he was propelled by his own attack. Tiamat looked over his shoulder with a slightly amused expression as he watched Issei stagger forward, about to fall. Finally, the chestnut continued to lurch forward as he screamed. His scream got even louder as he saw Tiamat's butt getting closer and closer to his face. A small clatter was heard, only to be followed after a short second by a scream. Tiamat's muffled pleasured scream was heard throughout the vicinity as Issei's fist sank deep into her voluptuous ass. Issei fell to the ground after that and immediately bowed deeply to her. "I'm sorry," she cried out, raising her gaze to denote the large blush on her face. He had seen a lot of dirty things during his life, so he knew a scream from a moan quite easily. "It's okay," Tiamat quickly replied, covering her butt and quickly turning around, causing Issei to see a blush on her face for the first time. It was an accident, and Tiamat averted her gaze in embarrassment. "It's not your fault, that place is so sensitive," she muttered under her breath, but it would still be audible enough for Issei to hear her. The awkward moment didn't last long, as Issei's armor shattered into 1,000 pieces. "What?" Issei wondered aloud, immediately standing up and looking down at his body in confusion. "What happened?" asked Tiamat, watching him curiously. Before Issei could answer, he felt his body go limp out of nowhere, causing him to stumble forward. To his luck, Tiamat caught him in a warm embrace. "Are you alright?" the dragoness asked, concern clear in her words. "Yeah, I'm just feeling weak," the chestnut replied, looking down at his hand in confusion. "It's normal." At the sound of Drake's voice, Tiamat and Issei broke off to listen to him carefully. "It's the first time you've come to this form, and the physical exhaustion is overwhelming. From what I see, you'll have to train your physique for a while longer to extend the use of the balance breaker without becoming exhausted." Issei blinked in disbelief. "Extend the duration, but I barely held it for a minute." "That's your limit for the moment. You'll have to get a little stronger and get used to the balance breaker to be able to use it for longer." "How long will it take me?" "You've already achieved the hardest part, but you still don't have enough time to control the balance breaker. I should also tell you that it's not all about brute force. It won't be long before you'll be forced to study your sacred gear to advance further." "Further advancement?" Issei wondered curiously. "This is bad." Tiamat's words interrupted Drade's response. "With only a minute of use, it will be very difficult for you to defeat an opponent with such a skill." The dragoness held her chin, thinking of a solution. "That can be easily solved. No." It was Tiamat's simple curt reply that instantly silenced Drake. Issei would just stare at her and awed her imposing expression. Finally, the dragoness let out a heavy sigh of exhaustion. "We'll think of something tomorrow. For now, let's go to sleep, it's already late." Issei just nodded with a smile, agreeing with the dragoness. Line jump. Issei was lying on the makeshift bed. Tiamat was sleeping next to him as usual, hugging him tightly, as if she was afraid he would disappear from one second to the next. Issei was gently stroking the dragoness's head that was resting on his chest. Tiamat had a small smile on her face, indicating that she was sleeping with great serenity. "Can't you sleep, mate?" "No." Issei replied quietly, while still watching the tender and beautiful expression the woman held. The chestnut brown smile was replaced by a serious expression. "I can't stop thinking about today." Even Tiamat said it will be very difficult to beat him in such a short time. A small, somewhat awkward silence was created in the cave, which luckily managed to be stifled thanks to Tiamat's cute expression and the caresses Issei was giving her. "Listen to me well, companion. There is a way to increase the duration." Hearing Drake's words, Issei stopped his caresses instantly. "Is that what Tiamat forbade you?" "It is. She has valid reasons for doing so, as it is a very dangerous and painful procedure." "Tell me more." "First of all, I want you to be clear about the words very dangerous. It's not a joke, it can kill you. You wouldn't be talking to me about this if it could kill me, so get to the point." "As usual, you don't mince words," the dragon declared with a proud tone in his words. "I'll only warn you one more time, are you sure?" Issei looked at Tiamat with a hint of doubt in his gaze. "I don't want to worry you, but there is no other way for me to get stronger in such a short time." "I knew you'd answer," the Drake stated with a satisfied tone in his words, indicating his approval towards his bearer's attitude. "We should move some distance away from the cave, so I don't hear your screams. Hearing the last part, Issei swallowed hard at the idea. But he finally nodded. Lifting her hand from Tiamat's head, the woman abandoned her small smile and quickly caught Issei's hand, placing it on her head again. Seeing this, a smile broke out on Issei's face. "Don't worry, I promise to be back soon," he commented quietly, stepping away more carefully than the previous time, unnoticed by the dragoness this time. Line jump. Tiamat woke with a start as she felt strange, as if something was missing. "Issei?" the dragoness asked, looking around the entire cave to see that it was completely empty. Her gaze finally settled on the exit, causing her eyes to widen in horror when she saw a large crimson glow. "No," Tiamat thought in terror, desperately getting up and disappearing in less than a jiffy because of her monstrous speed. She flew through all the trees with absurd speed, arriving at Issei in less than a second. "Issei!" she shouted loudly, observing how his right arm was completely covered in blood while he gasped in a completely abnormal way. Issei raised his gaze to give her a pained smile. "Tiamat? I'm sorry to wake you by that intense glow." Before he could realize it, the dragoness had hugged him tightly, causing the brown to be surprised by the sudden gesture. "I told you not to do that." The dragoness reprimanded him, cupping her face into Issei's neck. Issei responded to the hug, feeling Tiamat cling to him even tighter after that action. "I'm sorry, but it was the only way." The moment didn't last long, as Tiamat abruptly pulled away, grabbing the arm where Drake's soul, or what was left of his soul, was housed. "You're a stupid asshole, you fucking underdeveloped lizard idiot," the dragoness shouted with great rage, as she shook Issei's bleeding hand hard. "Even when we first met I wasn't this angry," Issei thought with her eyes rolling, after hearing the sheer amount of bad words coming from such beautiful lips. "Calm down, you crazy bitch. I only replaced Issei's arm with a dragon's. I would never replace her whole body," knowing the obvious result. Drake shouted. Again, Issei rolled his eyes at the sound of his partner's voice. He was also sure he had never heard him so angry. "I don't care. You know damn well that with just one body part replaced, he could have died," shouted Tiamat, shaking his arm even harder. "Do you really think I would have done that, at such great risk?" Tiamat stopped instantly, completely taken aback by what Drake had said and the piercing tone he had used. "I'm inside him, I've been with him the longest, and I understand sacred gear the most out of the three of us, even if my knowledge is basic. Those 3 reasons are more than enough to take the risk, knowing the boy's body." Tiamat raised an eyebrow at this. "And what does that have to do with anything? The balance breaker takes more training to release, and my partner managed to wake him up early. Having the records of the upgrades he got on the gauntlet with his first fight, there's also something that doesn't fit. After being with him for so long, I noticed that he has a much greater compatibility with dragons than usual. That his arm has not been corroded by the power is proof of that. Tiamat looked rather impressed at the bleeding arm she was holding. "It's true he can control dragon power quite well, despite being a demon." Tiamat blinked in confusion. "But how is that possible?" "As I said before, he has a great compatibility with dragons. I mean, his body has nothing to do with it, but his soul does. Another example I could give is when he momentarily acquired the sense of smell of a dragon, tracking your aura the first time he came to the familiar realm, when he had just started to wield the boosted gear. After hearing Drake's explanation, Tiamat let go of his arm as he looked at Issei with slightly widened eyes. She didn't know that her new friend possessed such an affinity with her species. It wasn't a bad thing though, in fact, she was strangely glad that it was so. "Drake, there's still something you didn't explain to me," Issei commented, making the dragon listen to him carefully. "I know that replacing one arm with another in itself sounds painful. But why are you at such risk of dying?" Issei asked with great doubt. "As you said before, the power and blood of a dragon is very corrosive to anyone," Tiamat answered for Drake. "That's why I didn't want you to do it. Keep in mind that countless people have tried to transform into dragons by various methods." Tiamat looked Issei straight in the eye. "They all died." Issei blinked in shock after hearing that. "What?" "I rant." Tiamat raised her gaze to the night sky. "Well, not all of them. There was one who survived the procedure." "Really?" Issei asked, very interested in the subject. Tiamat lowered her gaze, giving him a very small smile. "That's right. Although at the moment, he's locked up in a dimensional prison." "Then I guess he wasn't a very good one," Issei thought to himself, wondering what a dimensional prison would look like from the inside. Issei snapped out of his thoughts when he felt delicate hands wrap around his waist, only to find himself leaning against Tiamat's back. "Anyway, let's go back to bed. Tomorrow I must explain the plan of victory. The dragoness commented with a small smile as she felt Issei's warmth begin to invade her body again. Issei settled onto Tiamat's back and wrapped her arms around her neck. I agree. The protagonist replied, giving a big yawn as she rested her head on Tiamat's shoulder. Seeing this, the dragoness rubbed her cheek affectionately against his, then began to walk calmly. Line jump. Listen to me carefully. Tiamat commanded, standing inside the blankets along with Issei due to the cold that day. Without a doubt, that demon's ability will be very problematic. But it has several weaknesses that are due to a common point, and that point is its species. Tiamat's words disoriented Issei. Being a demon, he possesses many weaknesses that cannot be hidden behind his immortality. For example, divine weapons, divine magic, anything related to God. Tiamat waved her hand dismissively, indicating that the previous points were not very important. The magical reserves. Tiamat stared at him, indicating that that was the point they were going to focus on. From what you told me, this razor guy needs a certain amount of magic to heal his wounds, depending on how big they are. After a whole rather serious explanation, Tiamat finally gives him a small smile. You have to use up all his magic reserves to beat him. You will achieve a victory by knockout or mental breakdown due to the loss of magic. Issei rubbed his hair skeptically. I don't know, it sounds complicated. As far as I remember, Razor had a fair amount of magic. I don't think I can force him to spend it all in such a short amount of time. Issei blinked twice after remembering something important. By the way, how long did the time stretch out, Drake? Bearing in mind that you were very exhausted yesterday, and the transformation of your arm, I'd say about 3 minutes. That should be enough. Tiamat's answer made Issei look at her in surprise. Remember what you said about Razor, that he got upset after receiving your dragon shot? That's because he's never been in a real battle before and must have felt a little scared. From what I understand, Razor participated in several raiding games. That's not a real fight. The dragoness replied seriously. By a real fight, I mean a life-threatening one. You die, or he dies. Raiding games are nothing but games. It's more than obvious that guy didn't have any real confrontation in his life if he got desperate for an attack that was far from killing him, thanks to his immortality. Issei nodded seriously. I get it, you want me to use that card to my advantage, don't you? That's right. Tiamat replied with satisfaction that her apprentice had caught on quickly. To accomplish that, you have to plant the seed of despair, both in his mind and in his heart. For that, Tiamat stood up abruptly, her gaze would turn to an icy one, as a very imposing and terrifying aura surrounded her completely, causing Issei to panic a little. The physical damage you implement must be on par with his psychological damage. Make sure you have a threatening posture at all times. If you have to say a few words, say just enough and necessary to sink him. Got it? Issei nodded repeatedly with a bit of fear at the sight of Tiamat's menacing figure. In that case, his countenance changed to his usual typical one. That's all. If you make sure to use the combat techniques you learned with me, your victory is assured. The dragoness finished, planting her hands on her hips with great pride. Issei looked down at her hands seriously. I understand, were the protagonist's simple words as her hand turned into a fist. Tiamat watched this with some interest, as she noticed in her apprentice's eyes a hint of doubt. What bad weather, the dragoness said dismissively, rubbing herself from the cold. She watched the snowfall with a grim look on her face. Issei picked up on this right away, so he decided to ask her. Did you get along with the snow? The young man encircled Tiamat in the warm blankets, causing the dragoness to let out a small sigh of relief as she took advantage of the situation to cling to his body. It's a personal thing. It doesn't bring back good memories. Tiamat clung to Issei's arm, then glared at him. Perhaps this day will be lost to time. Issei rubbed his cheek with a smile at what he heard. In fact, I was thinking of putting training aside these last 2 days. I've already achieved the goal I wanted to reach, and I'd really like to spend time with you. Would you like to? Issei was surprised when he felt Tiamat wrap her arms around him. If that hadn't served as an answer, the sweet smile and force on Tiamat's face was enough to clear it up. I guess I can take that as a yes. Issei commented, returning her smile. Line jump. Issei fell resoundingly to the ground when he received a heavy snowball to the face. Damn. The protagonist exclaimed, jumping to his feet with a mischievous grin on his face. The little dragon just laughed at his reaction as he dodged a barrage of snowballs, courtesy of Issei. That pitched battle ended abruptly when they both received a heavy snowball to the face, causing them both to look to where the attack came from. The dragon's father was juggling more than 30 balls at the same time. Seeing this, they both widened their eyes, completely shocked. "Retreat!" Issei shouted, being followed by the dragoness's shout. They both ran and threw themselves behind the nearest tree to dodge the rain of snow that rained down on them. Tiamat was watching everything from inside the cave along with the dragon's mother. She was watching attentively all the events. After a few seconds, she raised her gaze to the sky to see the snow slowly falling. "Ever since Dragonfall happened to me, I see snow differently. Those little flakes that fall slowly until they reach the ground, with that silence that makes them inaudible." A melancholy look crossed Tiamat's eyes as she had a small flashback of her kneeling in a cave as tears fell from her face. She was crying completely silently, thinking about what she had done to deserve all that. She loved him, but that guy only saw her as a trophy. She herself heard that her ex-fiancé had said that no one would marry a woman as crazy and loud as she was, and for that very reason it was very easy to charm her, because the only thing attractive about her was her looks. He said that her ass and breasts were the only redeemable thing she had, and for that very reason no one would fall in love with her. She was a monster among dragons, someone who didn't deserve to have such overwhelming power as she did. A monster. Monster. Those words repeated incessantly in his head, making his chest burn with pain, and his mind go completely blank due to the enormous emptiness he felt in his stomach, to the point of comparing himself to a huge black hole, where only negative emotions could fit. They always remind me of my tears the only time I ever cried. A long time has passed since then, but I can't forget how broken I was that day. Tiamat closed her eyes as a snowflake fell on her nose. It was snowing that day too, exactly as calmly as it is now. Tiamat lowered her gaze to watch with a small smile as Issei was having the time of his life. But now it's different. She raised her gaze again, watching with a joyful gleam in her eyes as the snowflake slowly fell, while Issei's voice and the roars of dragons decorated the atmosphere. Now when snow falls, it makes everything around me feel so warm, so familiar, so pleasant. I don't know why, but I don't care to know either. I just want to enjoy this moment. I want to enjoy it with them, I want to enjoy it with him." Just as she finished her thought, a snowball hit her face. Tiamat slowly took off the snowball with a friendless look on her face to see how Issei was playing with a snowball. "Want to play?" Issei asked, then sharpened his smile. "Rather, do you want revenge?" After hearing Issei's words, a predatory smile decorated Tiamat's face, making the young man immediately alert. Tiamat soon emerged from the cave, creating a massive amount of snowballs with her magical affinity, causing Issei to blink in disbelief. He quickly moved behind a tree, covering his face as he heard a huge flock of snowballs hit the trunk. When he heard no more, he emerged from his hiding place without first preparing a few snowballs. Issei watched with some surprise as Tiamat was relatively close to their position, so they both began to throw a large number of snowballs at each other, though much more gently than last time as they ran in a circle around each other, until finally it happened. "Ha ha ha." Issei stopped dead in his tracks when he heard Tiamat's laughter. She had a huge smile on her face as she laughed in an angelic voice. Issei couldn't help but blush when he heard that melodious laugh, along with the beautiful smile that decorated her face. The whole approach gave her face a completely precious glow, which did not go unnoticed by him. True, I'd heard her laugh before, but that case was a bit too punctual. Cough, cough. Making fun of Drake cough, corf. Dot. Instead, now she was laughing just because she was playing snowballs. As Issei was distracted, he received a heavy snowball to the face courtesy of Tiamat, causing him to stagger backwards. Tiamat's expression quickly changed to a worried one as she saw that Issei was about to fall. "Watch out!" the dragoness exclaimed, grabbing his arm in an attempt to keep him upright. Unfortunately, they both fell because of this. Issei felt an extra weight on top of him. That doubt was quickly answered when he felt a warm hand brush the snow off his face, causing a small blush to shoot up his face instantly. Tiamat was on top of him, still with that smile on her face that made her so beautiful. Her face was just inches away from touching his, making him feel the warm, slightly accelerated breath hit his lips. Issei would have continued to stare at her longer had he not caught out of the corner of his eye how an unidentified white object was heading straight for Tiamat's face. "Watch out!" Issei exclaimed, grabbing her very firmly by her waist, causing a small blush to decorate Tiamat's face as she felt the man's firm, warm grip. Issei rolled over, receiving the snowball in Tiamat's place, though instead of hitting her face, it hit her shoulder. Still, he had something else to worry about right now. "Thank you," Tiamat declared, feeling like her chest was starting to burn with a huge warmth. But unlike the other time, it was a warmth that was completely cocooning her. And most likely due to how their noses were in contact, along with Issei's grip on her hips, and adding that she was now the one bearing all of Issei's weight on top of her body, and it wasn't bad at all. "No problem," Issei replied, not finding the strength to pull away from Tiamat. For some strange reason, he was incredibly drawn to those beautiful cool light blue eyes that, oddly enough, gave off an enormous amount of comfort and warmth that was directed solely towards him, and it felt incredible. It was as if her gaze was calling out to him. It was telling him that he needed him right now, in this very place. And that vision wasn't far wrong, as Tiamat let him know in a subtle way. "Are you comfortable?" the dragoness asked with an amused tone in her voice, causing a huge blush to shoot up Issei's face, not only because of her words, but also because of how her hands wrapped around Issei's back, enclosing him in a deep embrace and making their torsos much more in contact. All in all, he could feel how her large padded breasts were pressing tightly against his chest. Before Issei could reply with a resounding "I'm sorry," a snowball hit him hard in the face, sending him rolling to Tiamat's side. Tiamat looked in the direction of the giggling little dragon, while her parents slapped their faces disapprovingly. The dragon queen felt a little strange when Issei pulled away from her body. She wasn't sure what it was about, but as she could explain it with a feeling, it would be disappointment. "Why should I be disappointed?" she thought, frowning slightly. She looked down at the snow to see that her hair was completely strewn across it, causing her to give a small sigh. She would have to shake it out well to make sure there was no snow left in it. Line jump. "I'm finding it harder than usual to find food today," Issei commented with a heavy sigh of exhaustion at the end, observing how the mother dragon was accompanying him in the dark night with some fruits in her hand. Luckily, the snow had stopped, so that made things a little easier. Issei blinked twice as he remembered something extremely important. "Tomorrow is the last day. What should I do? What could I do?" Issei wondered as he put his hand to his chin, then looked at the dragon mother carefully. "Wait a minute, you guys are like family, aren't you?" The aforementioned looked at him curiously, nodding. "Does that mean you can also use magic circles to move from place to place?" She nodded again, causing a small smile to break out on Issei's face. "I need to ask you a favor." Hearing his words, the mama dragon watched him carefully. Line jump. In this last month, Tiamat managed to sleep totally August, despite not using her magic to cover herself. All this was thanks to Issei, since her heat gave him an impressive well-being, added to the blankets that surrounded them, because they helped even more to capture the heat and smell of Issei. Being a dragon, her nose was very sensitive, so being able to smell Issei meant a lot more than she seemed. Even so, today she felt especially hot. It was kind of strange, since they were in the middle of nowhere, facing a winter that was scorching. In fact, it is for that very reason that she began to wake up. She opened her eyes slowly, and as always, she was snuggled into Issei's body, while she had her face colliding with his, her hair scattered all over her mattress, giving her an incredibly pretty appearance. "Wait a second. Mattress." Tiamat poked half of her face above the covers, completely stunned by what she was seeing. It was a room. To be specific, a human habitation. It was full of photos of two people she didn't know, adding to the typical things that were in a double bedroom. She rolled her precious icy blue eyes in all directions, studying the place. She wasn't scared or alert as Issei was right next to her. It took her a few seconds to realize that said bedroom looked suspiciously familiar. "Isn't this the room that was on the first floor where Issei lived?" the woman wondered inwardly, her eyes slightly widening. "How the hell did we get to this place? Have you woken up yet?" Issei stuck her face out of her blanket, giving her a toothy smile. "How did we get here?" the dragon asked quickly, looking at him in genuine surprise. Issei only increased her smile even more after hearing the question. "When you were asleep, we moved to this place thanks to our little friends. I hope you liked the surprise. How was it possible that you could move me from one place to another without me noticing?" Issei rubbed her hair with her smile still in force. "I just carried you in my arms. You were so asleep that you didn't realize it, you just murmured something and hugged me tightly." Upon hearing Issei's response, Tiamat hid her face again in her blankets so that she wouldn't see the small blush that had formed on her cheeks. "Because?" Issei looked at her with some confusion due to her attitude, a confusion that was instantly dispelled. "Today I plan to fulfill the promise I made you a month ago." Hearing this, Tiamat threw the covers off of her in one swift motion, impressing Issei. "Shall we go out to eat?" the dragon asked with her typical expression, although the sparkle of emotion that was present in both of her eyes indicated that she was happy. "Exactly. I already have the park where we're going. We just need to bring my barbecue, some meat and that's it," Issei replied with a big smile on her face. "Barbecue?" the dragon wondered aloud. "There is no other device that cooks meat better than a barbecue," Issei exclaimed, holding up her thumb. Seeing this, Tiamat only responded with a small smile on her face. "First, you have to prepare," he exclaimed again, jumping up from the bed. The first thing Issei did when she got up was to go to the kitchen and see the cell phone. 40 missed calls? The chestnut wondered incredulously. Who could have called him so many times, considering that his clubmates don't have his number? The answer came instantly. "Mitsuda, Motohama, Mitsuda, Motohama, Mitsuda, Motohama," Issei muttered under his breath as he had a blank expression on his face. Finally, he closed his cell phone and took a deep breath. "When we meet again, I'll have to come up with a perfect excuse," the protagonist thought, rubbing his head in frustration. "Everything is ready." Issei turned to see Tiamat. She had a backpack on her back and her typical white outfit that was somewhat tight that highlighted her beautiful figure. "Then let's not waste any more time," Issei exclaimed excitedly, making Tiamat nod with a small smile. Somehow, Issei had conveyed all of his emotion to her. Or rather, she was just so glad to be able to go out to eat with him and spend some pretty nice and comfortable time alone. Issei felt the same way as Tiamat, although he also had other reasons to be so excited, since he had only done this with his two friends. Doing it with a company as nice and beautiful as Tiamat was added many more points. Line jump. During the journey to buy food, Tiamat looked from one place to another, somewhat impressed. He had never seen the new way of living that humans had since he had isolated himself for almost 2 millennia. He found it fascinating that each one goes on his own. The structure of the building seemed fascinating to him, the cars seemed fascinating to him, absolutely everything he saw seemed fascinating to him. But, thanks to her neutral and serious personality, those emotions could only be distinguished by Issei himself, who already knew her quite well. They had lived for a month together, after all. Finally, they both arrived at the park that Issei had used for the purpose of training the last time he was there, but now the purpose was completely different. Issei and Tiamat were sitting in the middle of the park, on top of a square blanket that served as a kind of picnic. They were both watching intently as the food was being made. Issei mostly to make sure he didn't ruin anything, while Tiamat couldn't resist the fabulous aroma he gave off from the grill. Issei looked away from her to see Tiamat's completely emotionless face, something very common for her. He admired her for several seconds, being completely stunned by the great beauty that her hair, her face, her eyes, her body, her skin gave off. "Our date? When did you take me to various places? You know what, it was so hard to pretend I was having a good time, ha 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 ha. It was totally boring. And then you wonder why no woman notices you. Do not make me laugh." Rainer's words hit Issei's head, causing him to lower his head and grit his teeth, feeling a small sting in her chest. Why do I remember that now? He cursed himself at the thought of him. Something wrong? Issei looked up from him quickly upon hearing Tiamat's worried tone. He didn't want her to worry about such trivial matters. Still, he couldn't help but ask the question. Issei looked down at him regretfully and rubbed his cheek. Are you having fun? Tiamat blinked in confusion upon hearing the question. Not hearing an answer, Issei assumed what she was thinking without even looking at her face. Sorry I made it sound like something cool at the time, but I guess there's nothing special about eating out. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry I got your hopes up for nothing. Issei yelled, squeezing his eyes shut. Who made you think that? Issei abruptly opened his eyes and looked at Tiamat's serious expression. Finally, Issei's shocked expression quickly softened. You realized? He asked, a bit embarrassed, and then lowered his head with some pain that did not go unnoticed by Tiamat. Do you remember that I had a girlfriend? Well, she told me that everything about me was completely boring, and for that very reason women don't like spending time with me. There was a rather awkward silence for Issei, which made him clench her fists from the discomfort of the moment. After a few seconds, a smile spread across Tiamat's face, and she took Issei's hand, causing the brunette to look at her in surprise. The dragoness didn't say a word. She only began to slowly approach hers while using the chestnut's arm to encircle her waist until she finally supported her body on it and affectionately rubbed her cheek against Issei's, making the chestnut blush. Tiamat? Issei asked with her blush still in force, not understanding why Tiamat had supported her face with hers after the affectionate caresses he received from her. Maybe she's right. Women may find you boring. But first and foremost, I'm a dragon, I'm a warrior, I'm a bloodthirsty. Lastly, I'm a woman too, but that's the last priority in everything. The list of things that I am. So, you have to believe me when I tell you that this is a lot of fun. Why? Because we dragons don't usually have these kinds of outings, it's something totally new to me. Tiamat she snuggled a little closer to Issei, resting her face on the brunette's shoulder so that he could see the sweet smile that was in effect on her face. Something new, which is very nice and fun. I'm sure that's because I'm experiencing it with you. Hearing his explanation, the painful pinch he felt in his chest was replaced by thousands of emotions spinning at a rapid speed in her chest, making him feel very warm in that place. A warmth that overwhelmed him, in a good way. Since his body reacted that way, he couldn't help but feel honored by the dragoness. Are you serious? I wouldn't consider myself that important. Issei answered, rubbing his hair in embarrassment, while her face still remained a faint reddish color. You don't need to remember the words of that woman, I can assure you that she has no idea of love if she manipulated you like that. Issei just nodded seriously, agreeing with Tiamat's words. Just focus on what you were thinking earlier. Tiamat concluded, even with her sweet smile and force on his beautiful face. Issei nodded decisively, she wasn't going to let Rainer ruin her day. Okay. The brown-haired man put a hand to his chin, thinking carefully. What was I thinking? Issei snapped his fingers with a smile on her face. Right. I was just admiring your figure. Tiamat blinked in slight surprise as a blush shot across his face. You have a great beauty that comes from your hair, your face, your eyes, your body, your skin, your smile, your attitude, your way of being. Basically, your entire body and personality fit perfectly, making you the most beautiful woman I have ever met. When she finished her speech, Issei stirred slightly when she felt how Tiamat's breasts pressed tightly against the side of her torso, feeling how her body was much closer to his while she received a strong hug from him. Her waist. When he tried to see Tiamat's face, he found that she had buried her face in the small cavity between the chestnut's neck and shoulder. Don't you like it when they talk about her appearance? Issei wondered with a raised eyebrow, not knowing that the dragon's reaction was due to her heart pounding, followed by great warmth, filling the pit of her stomach and her chest, making her body a mess of heat. Feelings right now that even his mind couldn't fully process. And all that was generated just by a few simple words. Oh, the meat! Issei exclaimed, separating from Tiamat. What's happening to me? Tiamat wondered, putting a hand to her chest out of sheer instinct. It's kind of like when I was in love, but now it's much stronger. He thought to himself, taking his other hand to her chest as he looked at Issei, unable to take his eyes off her. Issei's words hit her mind again, making her body shake from the warmth that those emotions so strange to her transmitted to her. A completely yearning sigh escaped from her beautiful lips as she was accompanied by her desire-filled gaze. Luckily for her, Issei was too focused on the meat to listen to her. She continued to look at him throughout until she finally felt strong enough to ask a question in her mind. I am beautiful? That's right, she found it incredible that someone would tell her that she is beautiful after the words she heard coming out of her ex-fiancé's mouth so long ago. Line jump. Issei sat in the tub, stretching out his body in pleasure. Although the natural hot springs found in the family kingdom are very comfortable, there is no better place than your own bathtub. Her body was surrounded by a small towel that was responsible for covering her manhood. When she finished washing her hair, Issei slightly widened her eyes as she began to feel various strange things. It was a similar feeling to her when she had discovered her demon powers after reincarnating. Although this time, it was just a strange thing. Do I smell honey? Issei wondered, completely puzzled by the situation. His confusion increased even more when he could smell a rather strong mint smell coming from outside the bathroom. In fact, it was so strong that he felt a small aura being drawn in that direction. Mint? Wait, it's exactly the same as when I saw Tiamat's aura, although now there's also that smell. A slight blush appeared on Issei's face. Wait a minute, why is his presence so close? Issei's response was answered instantly when Tiamat opened the bathroom door. Luckily for her, she wasn't naked. She was wearing her white underwear. She fit her quite well, and it didn't seem like a tight-fitting garment. But because of her voluptuous body, her bra and panties fit her body a little too tightly. "Do you mind if I take a bath with you?" the dragon asked with her typical serious expression on her face. Issei just nodded with a small smile. "It doesn't bother me." Tiamat watched him with a small smile as she saw her attitude changed from her. "I see that this month has served enough for you to no longer be ashamed to see me half naked," the dragoness commented, sitting on top of Issei to enter the shower because she was very small. Changing the subject, "I think my body is undergoing a strange change. Now I can feel your aura, and various scents," Issei said, caressing and washing Tiamat's hair, causing the dragoness to close her eyes in satisfaction. Perhaps it was because he was too focused on the new changes he was undergoing, and for that very reason he did not realize that Tiamat's creamy and soft skin was in contact with his. But Tiamat was not exempt from such information. It is a peculiarity of dragons to track other dragons. Only my kind can use said power. This process would sooner or later occur in your body, and most likely it came so early thanks to the fact that now your body has a special arm. Tiamat answered, wrapping her legs around Issei's and resting her back on the protagonist's chest with great satisfaction. Tracking only works if the dragon is using a ridiculous amount of power, or if they're relatively close. "I see, so dragon powers," Issei commented, imagining how many powers a dragon could have. First the dragon shot, and now this. The young man drifted so long in thought of him that he acted entirely on instinct as he wrapped his hands around Tiamat's abdomen and rested his chin on the head of the woman. Dragoness. A small blush shot across Tiamat's face as he felt the sudden contact, but he didn't bother about it. In fact, quite the opposite. A small smile appeared on his face as he leaned even more into Issei's embrace and joined his hands with the man's in a very affectionate gesture, to the point of being loving. He acted so nervous before, and now he seems like a completely different person. Chances are he had problems with perversion before to get so nervous. Another option could be that he's a full-fledged virgin, but we wouldn't be in this position if that were the case. The memory of when Issei accidentally hit his butt flew into his mind, making him look down, feeling how his hips were perfectly positioned in the delicate spot for Issei. "I wonder if that perversion would wake up now. Would feeling his member squeeze my butt feel even better than that time?" After thinking about that situation, Tiamat couldn't help but squeeze his thighs with great force as she felt a tingle that she hadn't felt for a long time invaded her crotch and inside him. Issei snapped out of his thoughts and started sniffing like a dog. "What is that?" "It smells like lemon," Issei wondered out loud with a raised eyebrow. Hearing Issei's words, Tiamat blinked in disbelief and quickly stopped squeezing his thighs. "Smell of lemon?" the dragoness asked with confusion. Issei blinked with the same expression as Tiamat. "No, I think I got it wrong. I'm still new to this smell thing," he commented, rubbing his hair in embarrassment. "I think we should leave now," Tiamat declared, rising from his new favorite seat. "This time, I'll make dinner. I'd like to practice the things you've taught me," the dragoness finished, giving her a sidelong look. Issei could see the small smile from her, causing her to get up instantly. "In that case, I'll go buy the products from you," Issei commented, getting out of the bathtub quickly and closing the sliding door. Tiamat only stared at the door for a few seconds until he finally brought his hand to her intimate area, giving it a little squeeze and then raising his hand again. She watched her hand carefully, as if she was searching for something. If you looked at it with the naked eye, you could only see small drops of water. But looking deeper, she could see a strange thin slimy thread connecting her index finger to her middle finger. "I can't believe she turned me on for something stupid," the dragoness thought with a slight frown, looking at the fluid with a bit of revulsion. Until she finally dropped the token on her. "Wait, when was the last time I got turned on?" the dragon wondered in great surprise. Line jump. Tiamat's meal had been a success. Even Issei was very surprised that he could reach a level almost as high as him, being the first time he had worked with said ingredients. Thanks to that, Issei could see a huge grateful smile from the dragoness, who indicated how grateful she was for her words. Still, all good things always come to an end. For the first time in a month, the two of them sleep separately, since it was not necessary to sleep together, since the climate in the residence was perfect. Issei slept in his usual bed, while Tiamat borrowed his parents' bedroom. After spending a whole month sleeping with Issei, it was quite difficult for her to fall asleep in such a big bed. She just felt empty. And that feeling of emptiness is what made him have nightmares. I don't know what the hell you're thinking, but you better stop following me. You misunderstood things from the beginning. I only helped you because you hurt me. I'm warning you, you better not follow me anymore. I have a woman by my side. I'm not going to cheat on her, especially if it's someone like you. This is goodbye, and I hope I never see your face again, crazy. Don't make me regret saving you even more. Goodbye. Those were Drake's words that were engraved on the ground as a farewell message totally befitting of her pedantic attitude when she was still alive. Those words were not only engraved on the earth, but also in the heart of Tiamat. She remembered those words in her dream, and she could only scream when she saw how a crimson dragon was flying high above. She didn't know why, but her wings didn't work, didn't respond to her. She couldn't reach it. After that day, she was sure that love was a term that should stay out of her life forever. First, someone who cheats on her, and then someone who abandons her. After that, they kill her mother and all of her friends in the war, except for Tannen. That emptiness that she had in her heart only increased to a great extent. She knew that she was to blame for not having been there for them, but the hatred that she felt towards Drake at that moment blinded her completely, and she simply blamed it on the celestial dragon. All her misfortunes were due to that foolish dragon. Without realizing it, Tiamat woke up and gave a great cry. He quickly looked around to see that she was in Issei's parents' room. Her heavy breathing and sweating were clear arguments of what she had been dreaming that night. She put both hands to her abdomen in an attempt to stop the agonizing emptiness that she felt in the pit of her stomach, which was so strong that it gave her the impression that her insides were going to tear into 1,000 different pieces. It was a completely unbearable feeling. Even so, the serious look continued to be in force on Tiamat's face. No matter what she dreamed, she had sworn that she would never cry again, and she would swallow all those horrible feelings to keep her promise. In any case, her impassive face was torn apart by the melancholic look that graced her beautiful light blue eyes, which were now being consumed by sadness. Still, she wouldn't cry. Issei burst into the room, completely alarmed after hearing Tiamat scream. The dragoness was in her underwear, but she didn't care in the slightest. What mattered to her at this moment was the agitation that her best friend had, added to the profuse sweating and the look full of sadness that adorned her face. He quickly went to her and sat on the edge of her bed, looking at her with great concern. What happened? Tiamat didn't answer her question, she simply hugged him tightly, causing the brunette to widen her eyes in surprise. Still, it didn't take me long to hug him back. Issei's embrace was so warm and strong that he began to absorb all the negative feelings from Tiamat's body. Quickly, that heartbreaking feeling of emptiness had transformed into a warm and rather cute feeling. He felt great, and she didn't understand how Issei had managed to cure her discomfort so quickly. "I'll sleep with you today. If you want, of course," Issei commented, stroking her hair to reassure her even more. Hearing those words, Tiamat hugged Issei even more tightly, burying her face in the brown chest while she nodded. Finally, they both went to bed in their underwear. Neither of them cared about that detail, they just wanted to feel comfortable with each other. Sleep without any problems. After several minutes, Issei managed to fall asleep, still holding a firm hug on Tiamat's body. The dragoness just watched him in silence for several seconds, feeling how her body was completely connected to his as usual, although this time with much less clothing. Still, she had her mind working on other things. "As I said before, you are a dragon of light." Tiamat delicately positioned her hand on Issei's cheek. A smile full of love and affection adorned Tiamat's face for the first time, while she did not take her eyes off her. "You are my dragon of light because you managed to light up my world in just 1 month. When I was so depressed and so hurt, completely devastated by pain, you came to lift me up. When I am with you, I feel like my head smells miles high. When I was a puzzle, you came to put me back together." Tiamat joined her nose with Issei's, while he began to rub her cheek with caresses full of love. "As you said when we first met, life is a drink, and love is a drug. I had taken the wrong ones and was completely devastated, but you offered me the right ones in those first 3 days and now I have no enough. You covered me with your beautiful white wings when I was so depressed." Tiamat closed her eyes deeply and brought her body closer to Issei's, their lips were practically touching by that action. "You make me feel so drunk and high. So high, so high. I promise that I will help you in any way possible. Not only for helping me and showing me a better way, but also for allowing me to feel what love is so healthy and true." Just when he was about to seal his lips with Issei's, memories flooded his head. No one will love her, she is a crazy deranged woman that the only good thing she has are her breasts and her butt. Don't come near me again. Goodbye. She abruptly separated her face from Issei's, having a somewhat sad look on her face. No. You've helped me so much, you've become my best friend, and I wouldn't want us to part just because of my feelings. She deeply closed her eyes as a small smile spread across her face. It's okay like that. She thought that, but a voice inside her constantly repeated. How long is he going to be fine like this? Although that little voice in her mind was tormenting her, it wasn't loud enough for her not to sleep with a small smile on her face. After everything she had lived through, having the man she loved by her side, someone as good as Issei, she didn't care if they didn't have that intimate relationship that she wanted so much right now. She just wanted to have him by her side and keep laughing with him. That's all she wanted. She wanted to be together with the light dragon of hers. Line jump. Hayadu. Hearing an unfamiliar voice, they both sat up in bed quickly. Tiamat covered Issei, while threatening an outstretched hand towards the albino woman. Grafia noted how the two were in their underwear, though it didn't seem to affect her. Sorry to interrupt, but it's almost time. Oh. It's the servant woman. Issei exclaimed, recognizing the newcomer. It didn't take long for her to blush, as she finally realized she was in her underwear, due to the woman's words. My name is Grafia, Mr. Hayadu. The albino would comment, giving a small bow. I'll be waiting for you outside the room. Don't forget to bring the pamphlet I gave you the first time we met. Issei just nodded, still embarrassed by the situation he found himself in. Finally, both Issei and Tiamat got dressed without saying a word. The tension in the air from nerves was almost palpable. I guess I'll be going now. Issei commented, tucking the pamphlet into his trousers. Tiamat couldn't believe that he always wore his academy attire for everything, but this was no time to question the reason for that action. Do you have something to say to me before you leave? Tiamat asked, crossing her arms as she saw the serious, indecisive look in Issei's eyes, something rarely seen in him. Issei lowered his head with a hint of regret. He raised his head with a nervous smile. Do you think I can stop Razor with just 3 minutes? Tiamat turned her back to him, looking at the window seriously as she still stood with her arms folded. Taking down an enemy who possesses such an ability will be very difficult with your current level. The dragoness replied, causing Issei to lower her head sadly. But. Issei looked up again in surprise, only to see Tiamat turn around to give him a big smile. I believe in you. She finished, placing a hand on his shoulder to comfort him. Issei's surprise was replaced by a small smile. What am I worrying about? Issei wondered aloud, walking towards the door. He paused as he grabbed the doorknob to give Tiamat one last look. I promise not to let you down. He exclaimed with a big grin between his teeth. Tiamat smiled back, giving him final parting words. Good luck. Line jump. Stop. Issei's shout made everyone turn around, looking with great surprise at the boy who had appeared by kicking the door hard, practically kicking it off with one blow. His gauntlet was active, glaring at the fiancés who had yet to formalize their vows. The Gremory retinue smiled at this, knowing that it would come at some point. Riaz could only watch in shock, while Razor seemed to begin to get angry at what was happening at his wedding. What is the meaning of this? Razor shouted, pointing at his subordinates. What are you waiting for? Cut the nuisance out. Razor looked at his entourage with great surprise as he didn't move from his seat, causing him to grit his teeth. Are you challenging me? It's not that, Razor. Razor watched as the Demon King positioned his hand on top of his shoulder. What is the meaning of this, Xerxes? Have you already forgotten that anyone could break into the wedding? Xerxes questioned, his condescending smile ever present on his face. Razor blinked in surprise, only to have him start to laugh cautiously, and finally burst out laughing. Even the nobles didn't have the guts to barge into this wedding, and you're telling me that stupid brat will do it? You can tell he's a complete fool. Razor exclaimed, finally finishing laughing. Brother. Riaz exclaimed, being stopped by Razor. Very well. You will be my last flame before I become a married man. Just be warned, I won't be as benevolent as last time. You did interrupt my wedding, after all. Razor commented with a smirk of superiority on his face, causing Issei to smile inwardly. First part of the plan successful. The battle will take place on one of the official rating game stages. You can use anything you have to your advantage, as long as it is no more than 2 items. The fight will end when the opponent is knocked unconscious, surrenders, or dies. Razor laughed at Xerxes' words. I don't need items to polish the floor with a low-class demon. Issei walked towards the stairs until he stood in front of Razor. Same here. He commented with a small smile, making Razor visibly annoyed by this. Was he calling him a low-class demon? Was he? Wait, Issei! Exclaimed Riaz with great concern, causing the aforementioned to give him a glare. Don't worry, President. I'll be done with this in 3 minutes. After saying those words, both Razor and Issei disappeared through a magic circle created by the Demon King. As soon as they disappeared, Ria's worried look twisted into a satisfied smile as he watched his brother. Good job. Serziches murmured, positioning his hand on top of his sister's head, causing Ria's smile to grow. I can't wait to see how those two idiots put on a great show for us. I just hope that show isn't ruined by another Razor victory. Riaz thought. Line jump. Issei looked around to see that he was standing on a huge piece of land that looked like a chessboard, though the pieces were spread out, and many of them were in terrible condition. He quickly came into focus when he saw Razor appear a few feet away from him. Issei met his gaze instantly. For starters, promotion, bishop. A huge bishop piece appeared in front of him, disappearing in an instant. Razor watched him with a raised eyebrow. Are you a fool? Do you know well that promotion to queen strengthens all your stats, while bishop only improves your power and magic reserves? A small smile broke out on Issei's face. Yes. I know very well that queen promotion can grant you other benefits, but the power is distributed. The bishop, on the other hand, only concentrates on anything to do with magic. Razor gritted his teeth slightly as he listened to her explanation. Are you saying you only need to improve your magic to beat me? Issei replied with a bold grin on his face, making Razor start to get really annoyed. Are you ready to begin? The Demon King's voice echoed in place, causing them both to nod. Then begin. Razor clenched his fists tightly and shouted with great force, causing a small blizzard to rise around him. Soon he was surrounded by a thin yellow aura that gave off power. What do you think, brat? When I said I wouldn't have benevolence, I meant I would use all my power from the start. Whoa, Lord Razor plans to use all his power. Don't you think he's overreacting? He's fighting a low-class demon. He'll sweep the floor with it in less than 10 seconds, I'm sure. All the voices that could be heard only made Razor's smug grin increase even more. Don't worry, I'll make sure to control myself so you don't end up dying. Issei was just looking at him seriously, causing Razor to raise an eyebrow. What's the matter, cat, got your tongue? A smile broke out on Issei's face. Are you done? Because I'd like to go in with all my power too. Razor got a little twitch of his eyebrow. Do whatever you want. Totally, everything you do will be completely in vain. Issei clenched his fists tightly as he gave him one last mocking look. Such confidence, how easy will it be to take her down? Issei's gaze completely transformed to a perfectly compassed one. Razor heard Issei's fists clench even tighter, making him pay attention to her. Nothing I do will do. Surely he's a reincarnated demon if he thinks he can take on someone like the Great Razor. He's an idiot. The good thing is, he'll get what he deserves, and he'll finally understand not to get involved in such important things. For the moment, let's see what a ridiculous thing he's about to do. Start the countdown, partner. Everyone in the audience was surprised to hear Drake's voice. Issei stretched his arms towards the ground with great force and finished with a huge shout to the sky. Oh-ha-cha. Razor was quick to cover his face from the huge blizzard that had been generated as he watched in complete amazement as a crimson aura completely surrounded Issei's body. The serious gaze of the protagonist was easily distinguishable through the huge whirlwind and the red aura that had been generated because of him. His eyes took on a green color for a second. His left foot flickered crimson, revealing a strong blood-red armor in its place. Next to change was his head, which was covered by a crimson helmet. Then, his arms were also covered by the same armor. Before the party ended, his legs were completely surrounded by the crimson armor, causing the huge blizzard around him to intensify a little more. To end the show, a gem appeared in the middle of his chest, then flashed green and materialized the entire armor in his torso sector, ending the transformation and causing a huge red flash to completely blind Razor, along with the huge blizzard that had intensified even more, if that was possible. The audience was watching the screen that was completely red from the dense aura, causing their jaws to tremble at what they were witnessing. Without warning, the huge crimson glow dissipated along with the blizzard, causing Razor to finally catch a glimpse of Issei. When he saw her figure, his eyes could do nothing but tremble with shock. Welsh dragon. Balance breaker. Balance breaker, Riaz exclaimed, shouted, completely shocked by what she was witnessing. Surziches just smiled sideways at his sister's reaction. This is better than I expected. The Demon King thought, a mysterious smile on his face as he stared at the Red Dragon Emperor. Razor could only continue to stare at him without being able to say a word. He was completely transfixed by what was happening in front of him. The threatening, suffocating crimson aura Issei was giving off didn't help either. Issei's helmet dematerialized, giving him a look that was identical to Tiamat's when she was angry or trying to assert herself. He had learned very well from his master. All Razor could think of was a forced smile. All that fuss just to put on that armor? The blonde commented, moving into an attack stance. You'd better put your helmet back on. He would add at last, his look much more serious than usual. He didn't know why, but that suffocating aura, along with Issei's stare, was putting him in a very bad mood, so he wasn't going to hold back in the slightest. A small smile broke out on Issei's face. The helmet? I won't need that to beat you. Hearing those words, Razor clenched his teeth tightly and trembled with anger. TSK. Have it your way, then don't reproach me when I knock your head off, shouted Razor fiercely, spreading his phoenix wings to lunge at Issei. Razor moved like a flash of light to where his foe stood, delivering a huge punch to Issei's face. Oh, at least, that's what everyone expected. What? Razor thought, blinking in complete shock as he saw how his fist had hit the air, as Issei had tilted his head to the side to dodge it, seemingly with great ease. Issei's tempered, piercing, and serious expression only made this fact annoy Razor even more. Issei jumped back a little and began to fly away, crossing his arms while still suffocating him with his gaze and aura. Razor just gritted his teeth hard and followed him swiftly, making numerous attacks that were aimed at the chestnut's face with impressive speed. Issei dodged all the blows with ease, swinging his body and ducking back and forth in the air, performing a great display of impressive movements, as if he were dancing. All Razor could do was grit his teeth more and more as he watched Issei dodge all his attacks, with his arms crossed and that cursed look still on his face. After several seconds with the same result, Razor decided to break away from him and tried to deliver a strong downward side kick that would be impossible to dodge because if Issei tried it, he would break him in half. Or so he thought. A great roar was heard as Issei parried the kick that was heading straight for his cheek with his forearm. It was a completely successful block, as his armor didn't even flinch from the impact. Razor could only stare at him in disbelief, unable to understand what was going on. But you only started 2 months ago? How are you able to parry and dodge my attacks? Issei merely remained silent, knocking Razor's leg off of him with a sharp movement of his arm, causing the phoenix to be forced to compose himself. Even so, he had no time to rest, as a strong punch was fired at his face, which he managed to dodge by the skin of his teeth by dodging to the side. Unbeknownst to the audience, the fight quickly turned in Issei's favor in less than a second, as he was throwing paws and punches left and right at Razor's face that were miraculously being dodged. Razor gave a small frustrated yelp as he saw an opportunity to counterattack, but it was nullified by Issei as his fist crashed hard into his own, causing both attacks to cancel each other out and create a very small shockwave at the center of the impact. Again, without anyone understanding anything, Razor and Issei began to collide all their punches, paws, and knees, creating small shockwaves throughout the arena due to how fast they were moving. What's going on? I can see them in a blur because of the speed. They're colliding all their attacks, canceling each other out. It's impressive. How is it that a low-class demon can match the attack strength and speed of a high-class demon? I don't know, but I must admit it's impressive. Surziches just laughed at the comments. Yes, evenly matched. Riaz could only watch the shockwaves with wide eyes, as could his entire entourage. They couldn't believe that Issei could be dealing with such a strong enemy, from their point of view. I don't get it. How can you keep up? Razor asked shouted, at the end of his tether. He couldn't believe that a low-class demon was standing up to him. Issei looked him straight in the eyes, causing Razor to widen his own slightly from the look his opponent had held throughout the fight. Your movements are very slow and weak, so it's very easy to match them. Hearing Issei's explanation, Razor widened his eyes in great fury. His movements reached an even greater speed, as did his strength. Seeing the drastic change, Issei bent his back backwards to dodge a punch that was headed for his face. Razor appeared in front of him, clenching his fist tightly. Try to match this. he shouted with great force, delivering a hard punch to Issei's face that shook absolutely everything around him for a second. The protagonist's face was forced to turn sideways by the inertia produced from the blow, his eyes covered by his hair. The bloodthirsty grin on Razor's face indicated how great it felt to land that blow. Without warning, yet another tremor was heard, sounding even louder than the last. Razor's smile faded instantly, and he slowly lowered his gaze to see Issei had pulled himself together without him even noticing, delivering a heavy blow to his abdomen that went all the way through him. Razor could only open his bleeding mouth in disbelief as he trembled in pain. He tried to fix the situation quickly, punching Issei in the face. Yet, he couldn't even finish raising his arm when Issei had already landed a huge punch to his jaw that sent him flying to the edge of the arena, crashing hard into the wall, and sending the already battered piece of horse completely crashing down on top of him. Issei merely lowered his fist and began to slowly advance towards Razor, for he knew that this was not over yet. A huge explosion of flames was released on the spot as an orange magic circle appeared above the rubble. When the smoke and dust cleared, Razor could be seen standing there, breathing heavily. His body was already healing at an enormous speed, but he still couldn't help staggering to his knees on the ground as he began to cry out in silent pain. Those 2 blows had left him with no stomach, half of his spine missing, and his jaw shattered. All in all, it was very painful. I don't understand. I swept the floor with him last time. How could he get so much better in such a short time? He thought with great anger and frustration. The accumulation of such emotions was so great that they had already completely flooded his mind, and his eyes showed it clearly. I don't care if you are the Sekuyuite, I will kill you for this humiliation. He finished his thoughts, watching with great hatred as Issei stood a couple of feet away from him. Razor's eyes grew wide as Issei's figure became a blur to his eyes. He instinctively rolled to the side to dodge the kick that went straight for his chin. Still lying on the ground, Razor looked down at him, gritting his teeth tightly as he trembled in disbelief. Razor wasted no time and quickly got up to try and land a few kicks that went straight for Issei's face, but Issei himself blocked them with his forearm without flinching a bit. After a few seconds of the same, Issei bent his leg backwards and charged with all his might, letting out a scream at the end when he landed a hard kick to Razor's face that made him spit out a large amount of blood. If that wasn't enough, Razor ended up swallowing a large amount of the ground as he was dragged several meters by the momentum of the blow, leaving a line of destruction in his wake. Issei pulled himself together and looked at him carefully. Razor began to pick himself up from the ground with considerable difficulty as a large amount of fire surrounded his face, which helped him heal after a second. The phoenix finished pulling himself together without much trouble, though his slightly ragged breathing and hate-filled gaze indicated that he was mentally unstable. This is over, shouted Razor with great force, rising into the air and raising his right hand in Issei's direction, causing a small ball of fire to begin to be created in his hand. Within seconds, 3 magic circles of significant size were created in front of his hand. Murmurs began to rise in the audience. Will he use that attack? It's Lord Razor's second best attack. The boy will end up badly injured, or even dead. It's a pity, he had great potential. Come to think of it, it's normal for him to have such potential if we're talking about the same Sekuyuite. It doesn't matter if he's low class. You're right. Brother. Riaz tugged at Zerzich's robes, only to be surprised when she saw that her brother's face was still impassive as usual, forcing her to look at the screen to find out what she was waiting for. I don't care if you're the Sekuyuite, you must pay for your insolence. Razor shouted at last, causing a small but powerful fireball to shoot out of his hand, which turned a golden color as it passed through the 3 magic circles, indicating that there was a lot of concentrated magic. The attack was so fast that it left a glowing trail in its wake. Razor's maniacal grin did not waver for a second, while Issei still continued to cross his arms, holding that look on his face. The attack was over the trajectory in less than a second, and just when everyone thought Issei was about to be defeated, the exact opposite happened. Issei raised his hand and deflected the attack into the sky like it was nothing, rendering everyone completely speechless by the action. It only took a few seconds for Razor to speak. How did you become so strong in just a month? How did you learn to fight so well in such a short time? Razor waited for a few seconds for an answer that never came, as Issei just continued to stare at him with that impassive, suffocating stare that infuriated Razor to his utmost point, causing him to shut his eyes tightly and grit his teeth. Say something. The scream was so loud that even Razor's sister herself was surprised, as she had never seen her brother lose his temper in such a manner. Razor opened his eyes and began to gasp for breath, not only because of the scream, but also because of the large amount of magical reserves he had expended to throw the previous attack. He continued to watch Issei, who didn't seem to want to say a word. But just as he was about to shout again, Issei opened his mouth. "If you don't surrender, I'll kill you." They were simple words. But those words were enough to make something inside Razor shake him completely. Something changed inside him. Those were his feelings of hatred, anger and frustration that he felt because of that dragon boy. Those feelings were replaced, changed, by a specific one. And that was panic. Razor's face transformed into one of utter terror when he heard Issei's words. The expression on his face was impossible to imitate, it was an utterly icy cutting terror. That feeling was the real hell. He wanted to shake it off as soon as possible. Razor rose even higher into the air, his utterly horrified face still palpable as he stared at Issei in sheer terror. Razor raised both his hands to the sky, beginning to create a huge fireball. "I can't lose, I can't die," Razor thought in desperation, putting an immense amount of his magical reserves into the attack. About 3 magic circles appeared again, but this time they were spread across the entire path he had to take to get in front of Issei. "Ah!" He unconsciously began to scream due to the large charge of energy he was using to prepare the attack. The large fireball grew larger and larger, to the point of being completely gigantic. The magnitude of the attack is immeasurable, it's going to kill him. Apparently it has angered Lord Razor. Otherwise, he wouldn't use that attack. Now he won't stand a chance. He can't dodge it, and it's multiple times stronger than the previous attack. It was a good fight. "Brother?" Riaz asked uneasily as he watched the huge fireball that didn't seem to stop growing. Surzich's features were faltering for the first time in the entire fight. He spent that much magical power in a single attack? "I didn't expect this, damn it, the griffin won't be able to save him with such a large magnitude of explosion, he'll die with it." "What the hell are you thinking, Razor? You know better than to let him die." As Surzich's clenched his arms tightly in his hands, that's when Riaz realized that things stopped going as planned. "Die, you fucking reincarnated demon!" Razor shouted at the top of his lungs, throwing the giant ball towards Issei. Issei watched with his impassive gaze as the ball with a diameter of about 20 meters approached his position, passing through the magic circles, becoming more and more yellow because of it. When it was only a few meters from touching the ground, all the debris shot out in various directions, out of the enormous pressure generated by the attack. Surzich's gritted his teeth slightly. "It's over, and we haven't even started the plan." Surzich's looked away, unwilling to see all his wonderful plan slip from his grasp. When the attack was only a meter away from Issei, the protagonist raised his right hand. "Dragon shot!" He shouted with great force at the end, causing a crimson bolt of lightning much smaller than Razor's attack to slam into the giant ball, stopping its advance in its tracks, and it didn't take long for it to advance towards Razor's direction. Everyone, even Razor himself, widened their eyes in complete shock at what they were witnessing. Issei had practically unleashed an attack with only a second's preparation and was overpowering the mini-sun that Razor had thrown in no time. "No!" Razor shouted, completely desperate as he threw a small amount of flames towards the attack to regain control, but the attack continued to slowly advance towards his direction. "Impossible, this can't be happening," Razor said, completely terrified, creating a large magical circle that served as a barrier in a poor attempt to fend off the attack. Both magical attacks hit the barrier and shattered it in less than a second. "This can't be happening, Ga." A completely blinding light illuminated Razor's figure, and then nothing could be seen of him, as he was completely enclosed within the attack. A second after that, the glow that surrounded the entire arena wavered for a second, only to expand into a huge golden explosion with crimson edges. The blast was so loud that it managed to be completely deafening. A huge whirlpool had been generated around the shockwave, which was responsible for shattering all the chess pieces in the arena. When the magnitude of the attack finally stopped expanding due to the containment barriers, which Surzich's himself had placed in advance, the shockwave shrank and disappeared out of nowhere, leaving a huge curtain of dust all over the arena, leaving absolutely nothing to be seen. Murmurs began to be heard from the audience, completely disbelieving what they had just witnessed with their own eyes. As the dust began to dissipate, everyone stared intently at the screen, creating a huge silence in the room, which quickly turned into gasps of shocked people. Issei was standing in the middle of the arena, with his helmet on. The armor would be severely damaged, but still it did not let its wearer take any damage. After a second, the armor self-regenerated and Issei's helmet dematerialized. "Partner, we have 20 seconds. "All right." Issei nodded earnestly. "It's time to move on to the third phase." "What do you plan to do to win?" Drake asked, genuinely intrigued. A small smile appeared on Issei's face. "The first thing Tiamat taught me, the feint. If that fails, I'll be sure to save some dragon shot for last." "I see, sounds promising," Drake replied with an excited tone in his voice. He couldn't wait to see what his partner would do. Their chatter ended just as Issei managed to make out through the dust as a large amount of fire landed in front of him. After a few seconds, Razor's figure became visible. He was kneeling on the ground, his eyes completely lost in the panic of the moment as his body trembled in terror. He wanted to end it all quickly, and he couldn't do it. Beads of sweat were running down his face, while the faint gasps of exhaustion were present in the air, added to the moans of pain that could be heard coming out in between. That magical aura around him had completely disappeared, indicating that he had almost no tricks left up his sleeve. Issei wasted no valuable time and positioned himself in front of Razor in one swift move, causing the blonde to become very visibly alarmed and rise up to try and deliver a desperate blow to the protagonist, a blow that failed for obvious reasons. He then attempted another punch which Issei dodged with ease, causing a small smile to appear on his face as he saw how Razor's punches were already lacking in technique and were only desperate measures to escape his predicament. Issei wasted no time and approached him with that smile still on his face, causing Razor's eyes to widen in horror. Issei flexed his right arm and charged with all his might in an obvious attack, causing Razor to look at his prominent punch with anticipation. "It's too obvious," shouted Razor, covering his left side and leaving his right side completely exposed. Issei's grin increased even more as he landed a hard left to the side of his ribs, causing him to spit out a large amount of blood and go flying, eventually ending up rolling on the floor. Razor got up with some ease, though his trembling never left his body. The wound on his mid-torso eventually healed, and he looked up again to see Issei. But when she did, she could only blink in disbelief when he was already in front of her again, charging her with yet another punch just like the last one. "You won't fool me with your ridiculous feint this time," Razor thought, covering his left side with one hand and his right with the other. Although his reaction had been correct, he could not withstand the enormous pressure exerted by Issei's fist, so his forearm ended up giving way with a horrible crack as it was ejected at a great speed by the force of the attack. As this time he flew into the sky, the only thing holding him back were the Sursage's barriers, as the battlefield was completely deserted for obvious reasons. Razor's body fell with a thud, which was completely broken when the sound of something shattering into 1,000 pieces reached everyone's ears. "Time's up," Drake warned with a slight tone of concern in his voice. Issei would stagger from the breaking of the balance breaker as the loss of power hit him abruptly. "Shit," he cursed to himself. "I should have prepared some previous boost in my gauntlet so the difference wouldn't be so great," Issei thought as he leaned on his knee, but it was too late to think about it. The crimson energy surrounding Issei ended up fading away completely. The only thing that had not disappeared from his armor was his gauntlet. Razor began to stand up with difficulty due to the pain he was currently feeling. The smile on his face was indescribable. What happened? That power was so short-lived. Razor's smile was completely wiped away as his vision became somewhat blurry, and he ended up falling to his knees because of it. Issei's eyes grew wide at the sight. "Mental exhaustion. This is my chance," he exclaimed, extending his hand towards Razor as a small ball began to grow larger and larger in his hand. "You plan to throw it at me from 100 feet away? Your attack is very strong, but it's no use if you don't hit your target, ha 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 ha." Razor laughed loudly as he tried to fully erect himself. Finally, the crimson ball managed to be large enough to fit into his palm. "If it's that easy, then ski it." Dragon shot. Razor watched the attack with a smirk on his face, but his expression turned into a complete puzzle as he prepared to move. What's wrong?" he wondered, staring at his legs in horror. I can't move them." Razor raised his hand and expended the last of his remaining magic to counter the attack. Issei's eyes widened in shock as another massive fireball materialized in his opponent's hands, but considerably smaller in size than the last. He still had that much magic. Unlike his previous attack, the fireball traversed its path in less than a second, impacting heavily against the dragon shot considerably weaker than the previous one, winning the clash by a very narrow margin and causing both attacks to explode very close to Issei, so it was inevitable that he would take some damage from the blast. He could only be seen to cover his face in vain, only to give a small cry of pain as he was enveloped by the edge of the blast. Razor watched the small curtain of dust as he gasped for breath. He was completely exhausted. Razor gritted his teeth and fell to his knees on the ground, clutching his head tightly as he felt that everything around him was a complete blur, and the enormous pain still lingered in his ribs on his right side. Wait a minute, they hadn't healed yet? Razor looked quickly at the stabbing area, only to widen his eyes in complete shock as he saw blood seeping from the wound from his broken ribs, and there was no flame covering it to heal him. Razor got up with great difficulty, staggering from side to side as he clutched his ribs with an expression of horror and pain on his face. He just hoped the boy was unconscious because he didn't want this torment to last a second longer. When he finally arrived at the scene, his eyes widened as he saw Issei propped up on his knees. His shirt was in tatters, and his trousers were a bit battered. His skin was visibly bruised, but it was nothing serious. On his hand a gauntlet had just materialized, implying that the small gauntlet had managed to absorb most of the impact. Issei raised his gaze, causing Razor to unconsciously take a step back. "This ends now." It was Issei's simple words that made Razor's teeth clench tightly. Issei lunged at Razor with a shout, charging his blow exactly as he had the last two times he had done so. Seeing this, Razor's eyes widened as wide as they could go. "Now you don't possess the strength you had before," he shouted with a big grin on his face, catching Issei's right fist with difficulty, as the strength was still evenly matched. Issei charged his left arm towards Razor's abdomen, being dodged by a millimeter, thanks to the blonde's anticipation. "I told you I wouldn't fall for your ridiculous feints anymore," shouted Razor with great force, starting to drive his fist straight for Issei's throat. "I win." "But what are you saying?" Razor startled a little when he saw Issei's hardened gaze. "You already lost when you let despair flood your mind and heart." Razor blinked in complete shock when he felt his attack stopped by Issei's hand as he grabbed his forearm, only to feel the chestnut open his fist and tighten his grip on Razor's other hand that had blocked him earlier. At that moment, all became silent and everything began to slow down. Issei's eyes could only visualize Razor's figure in front of him. Everything around him was black. He was looking at Razor, specifically at his chin. A loud deafening roar broke the silence. That loud cutting, devastating roar had been originated when Issei's knee impacted with shattering force on Razor's chin. Time had come to a complete standstill at that precise moment, watching from different angles. All that, just for everyone to observe the magnitude of what that blow meant. The knee was repeated again, and again, and again, and again in the reader's mind from different angles, until finally everything started to slow down again. The mouths of the whole audience were wide open, they couldn't believe their eyes. As everything was going much slower, the figure of Razor spitting out a large amount of blood with blank eyes was easily distinguishable. Meanwhile, Issei was still in the air just like Razor, his knee still bent, his vision completely obscured by his hair. Finally, the young man looked up with great seriousness to see Razor's body still slowly falling, about to hit the ground. Taking down an enemy who possesses such a skill will be very difficult with your current level. But Issei's eyes recorded the moment as Razor's head began to roser the ground. "I believe in you." The first sound heard in that long silence would be Razor's body landing on the ground, crawling like a sack of rubbish a few feet, until his face fell limply to the side, denoting his eyes rolled back in his head. Issei finally landed, gazing intently at Razor. "Our Razor Phoenix has been knocked unconscious. The winner is Hayadu Issei," the Demon King exclaimed, declaring the end of the battle. After those words, another overwhelming silence followed. Hearing that, Issei raised his gaze to the sky, dropping his arms to his sides. "Why do I feel this way?" Issei closed his eyes in utter tranquility. "I just won a battle against a strong guy. It was just a successful rematch against someone who had humiliated me. I only did it for the president." At that moment, that's when Tiamat's words came back into his head. "If you find that moment." Issei raised his gauntlet to the sky and clenched it with great force. "You will be completely fascinated by the true meaning of combat." Yes. Issei shouted with great force and shook his fist with great passion to shake off all the fabulous emotions that were overwhelming his mind completely. Hearing his shout, Riaz trembled with excitement as he had been freed from the arranged marriage. Whoa! He beat Razor. Who is that guy? I have no idea, but apparently he's the bearer of the Welsh dragon. A great deal of muttering and shouting began to be heard from all the demons in the room, with the exception of Razor's retinue who rushed to his aid. Issei was forced to stop his revelry as he was teleported into the room, causing him to look to the front of him out of obligation as he saw the entire Razor squad quickly approach him, giving him various compliments and congratulations on how he had performed, causing a big toothy grin to break out on Issei's face as a slight blush shot across his face at the words of his friends. And as Kaneko stroked his hair with a hint of admiration on her face. That was amazing, Dragon Boy. Or should I call you Issei? Surziches walked over to him, clapping for his victory along with his sister, who greeted him with a tight hug. Issei, I was so worried. Riaz exclaimed, hugging him even tighter. Issei broke away from the hug, shocking those present. You don't have to be anymore, now you're free to marry whoever you want. The protagonist exclaimed with a raised thumb. The Gremory entourage looked at each other seriously for a minute, even Surzich's face got a little serious. Seeing this, Issei looked at them all with confusion. Did I say something wrong? He asked, seeing everyone looking at him strangely. Issei, let's go talk outside. Surziches commented, being joined by Riaz. The Gremory retinue looked at each other earnestly. I suppose Lord Surziches will resort to plan B. Akeno commented, giving a small sigh of weariness. For the moment, we shouldn't worry. Everything went according to plan, with the exception of certain irregularities. Let's let Riaz have a little trip with Issei, so they start getting closer. Kiba just nodded with a tired smile on his face. I just hope everything goes well. I wouldn't want to have to do certain things. I wouldn't mind. Kaneko commented, generating a magic circle at the feet of her friends. Me neither. Asia concluded with a mysterious smile on her face. A few demons looked at each other in confusion as Issei had left along with Surziches and her sister. That she is free to marry whomever she wants? Then why did he rescue her, knowing he would be engaged to her if he did? The other fully muscled demon with purple eyes bowed his shoulders. I don't know, I'm not that close with my cousin. The guy folded his arms with a defiant grin on his face. But that guy is most interesting. I hope we can talk soon. Line jump. I would like you to escort my sister to the academy. Escort? Wait, Sister Issei blinked in disbelief at the end. Now that I remember, Grafia had told me about this, Issei concluded, rubbing his chin. Surziches chuckled at Issei's nonchalant attitude. My name is Surziches Lucifer, I hope we get along. Ria's brother said, bowing his hand and being shaken by Issei immediately. Same here. Replied the protagonist with a smile. Just as they finished introducing themselves, something glittered loudly in Issei's right pocket, causing him to let out a small cry of surprise as a strange bird appeared between him and Riaz. By this I meant escorting her. Surziches commented, resting a hand on the griffin. I hope you take good care of her. Brother. Riaz exclaimed with a blush on his face, causing Issei to look at her in confusion and his brother to chuckle. In the end, they both climbed onto the griffin and raised their hand in a grand farewell, disappearing into the reddish sky of hell. When there was finally no sign of them, Surziches lowered his hand, and a grim smile graced his face. It's time to try the first step, Riaz thought with an evil grin on his face that Issei didn't see, as he was looking straight ahead. Knowing what Issei's attitude is like, I'm sure a right first step is to use some of my gifts. After all, I don't think Issei has changed that much in just a month. Riaz hugged him tightly by his bare back, causing her slightly exposed cleavage to rub against Issei's rough skin from the recent battle. In a way, Riaz was right. It's very hard for Issei to change all that perverted attitude in a month. What she didn't know was that her body looked like a plank if compared to the well-exercised and voluptuous body of a certain dragoness who had the chance to see naked every day thanks to the natural hot springs. Somehow, that mysterious dragoness had served as a remedy to control that side of Issei to a great extent. That, and thanks to her new mentality, allowed her to face that one dark side she had in her heart. Riaz blinked in surprise when Issei seemed unfazed by his action. Still, he didn't have time to get angry, as something came to his mind thanks to his earlier thought. Hey Issei. Where were you all last month? Issei looked over his shoulders to answer him. I was training in the family realm. Riaz was visibly taken aback by the revelation. But, we looked everywhere for you there. Well, everywhere, except for the place where a monster lives that would be able to tear you apart in less than a second. A monster? Issei asked with a roll of his eyes. Well, in a way, that idea isn't quite right. He thought. Yes. Riaz nodded. There's no telling what kind of monster it is, since no one survived to tell the tale. Everyone who tried to find out what's going on around that area ended up disappearing without a trace. Before Riaz could continue his conversation, he could watch as Issei spoke through a small magic circle in his ear. You can teleport me, I'm looking forward to seeing you too, and thanking you. Issei gave Riaz a quick embarrassed glance. I'm sorry, President, I must leave you alone. I know I promised her, but that person helped me too much, and it would be very cruel and ungrateful of me to keep her waiting. Before Riaz could ask who it was, Issei disappeared in a celestial magic circle and made the girl fall to the front since she didn't have the back of Issei's back. Make her? Riaz frowned as he noticed that the word meant a lot more than it sounded. I'd better tell my brother about this. Looks like someone's going to have to go back to the academy alone. Line jump. As soon as he appeared in the cave, Issei felt very soft and delicate arms wrap around him completely, enclosing him in a deep embrace. The next thing he felt was how the cleavage protruding over an unbuttoned one pressed tightly to his chest, feeling a great warmth in that little triangle that was exposed, causing him to blush almost immediately. Still, he was much more focused on returning the hug. Congratulations! Tiamat exclaimed with great enthusiasm. He was so happy, even his little canine fangs decided to make an appearance. How do you know? Issei asked in great surprise, breaking away from the embrace a little to see Tiamat's beautiful smiling face. Tiamat gave him a small tap on the forehead as she laughed. Remember, we can feel what the other feels, silly. Then you know how I felt when I won, don't you? Tiamat nodded with a smile. Yes, yes. You finally knew that courage you lacked to get caught up in the feeling of what a battle is like. It's exactly the same feeling as mine when I enter a fight, no matter who my opponent is. I guess you've rubbed off a thing or two on me. Issei added as they both continued to laugh. I wasn't the one who put that idea in you about replacing your demon arm with a dragon's. Tiamat exclaimed with a chuckle, until finally something important popped into her head. Wait a minute, do you feel something weird in your arm? Tiamat inquired seriously, touching Issei's arm with both her hands, looking for any part that was out of place. No, why? Asked Issei with great intrigue at the sudden change in attitude presented by her best friend and future lover. As I said before, a dragon's power is very corrosive. When you use it, there can also be serious consequences. Still, you seem to be fine. Tiamat concluded. Her gaze twisted to a more tender one as her touches began to transform into caresses, causing Issei to be surprised by the act. You have given your arm to save your mistress. She must be a very good woman for you to have decided to give away a part of your body to rescue her. Tiamat's gaze changed to a more delicate one as she continued to stroke his arm. It must be great to have someone who really appreciates you that much. If it were up to you, I'd give up my other arm. Tiamat raised her gaze, visibly impressed by what she had heard. And if that's not enough, I'd also give up both my legs. And then my right eye, I suppose. By now, Tiamat's feelings and emotions were running so fast they were impossible to describe. She just needed to expel them somewhere, in one place, otherwise she would explode. And for that very reason, Issei was receiving a big kiss on his forehead from Tiamat. Issei could only blush and feel his heart flutter out of control for such a stupid thing as a kiss on the forehead was. But he couldn't help but think that it felt very special. After a few seconds, Tiamat pulled away from Issei and gave him a big smile. That's very nice of you, but I won't allow you to give away parts of your body to save me. If anything, I'll be the one to save you. Tiamat concluded, positioning both hands on Issei's cheeks in a very affectionate manner. I won't be behind you forever. Issei exclaimed with a smile on his face, standing up suddenly and causing Tiamat to be surprised. I made a bet that I'll beat you, and I intend to win it. HMP. Tiamat said with an amused tone in her voice as she stood up straight. That I'll have to see for myself. But, for now, I will make sure you learn many other basic techniques that we left out because of your meager magic, and they are very important. With your new power, I'm sure you'll be able to master them. You bet. Issei exclaimed, clenching his fist tightly with conviction. Tiamat's determined expression would turn into a smirk. But before that, you have to make up all the classes you missed throughout all these days, you know what I mean? Tiamat asked, pulling out Issei's black briefcase from behind a stone. At the sight of the briefcase, Issei began to sweat profusely as a poker face dominated his expression, turning completely pale instantly. Tiamat waved the briefcase close to his face, further increasing her smirk as she saw him avert his gaze elsewhere. You know that, don't you? End of chapter. I hope you liked this chapter. It was really complicated to translate because of how long it was, but I finally managed to finish it. In this chapter 1 did 2 different focuses. The first one was Tiamat and Issei going deeper into their relationship, while the second one was the final battle of this arc. Probably because I wanted to add so many interesting facts. 1. Drake sleeps all day if Issei isn't training, isn't in danger, or isn't in an interesting battle. 2. Rhea still can't use the power of destruction, as it was forbidden by his brother, because he can't control it properly. For the same reason he didn't use it when he fought Razor. 3. The second waifu will make an appearance before the battle against Kakabiel. Thank you for watching part 4 of this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and liking the video. I hope to see you in the next video.